Morning, everyone. Gandang maga po sa lahat. This meeting is now called to order. Before I begin, I call this organizational meeting and public hearing of the Committee on Energy to order. For the purpose of administration, let me just manifest the members of the said committee. The Vice Chairperson, Senator Nancy Binay. The members of the committee, Senator Angara, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Gordon, Senator Lacson, Senator Lapid, Senator Marcos, Senator Pacquiao, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Tolentino, Senator De Lima, Senator Hontiveros, Senator Pangilinan. Kung maririnig nyo, star-studded po yung mga members natin. No? May I ask the committee secretary to acknowledge our resource persons for today? Ma'am?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Senator Binay. Good morning, everyone. I would like to acknowledge our guests and resource persons for today's organizational meeting and public hearing. From the Department of Energy, Mr. Mayo Marsigan. From the DOE Renewable Energy Management Bureau, Mr. Fortunato Sibayan. From the DOE Electric Power Industry Management Bureau, Mr. Mayo Marsigan. From the National Renewable Energy Board, Attorney Mona Lisa de Malanta. From the National Grid Corporation of the Philippines, Engineer Hansel Kubangbang and Engineer Anthony Christian Tang. From the National Transmission Corporation, Mr. Alipio Agaton. From the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation, Ms. Jocelyn Tarabuena. From the Manila Electric Company, Mr. Benjamin Nolasco. From the Developers of Renewable Energy for Advancement Incorporated Dream, Attorney Jose Layug. From the Philippine Solar and Storage Energy Alliance, Ms. Claire Marie Yvonne Lee and Ms. Maria Teresa Capelan. From the Power Source Philippines Incorporated, Mr. Chris Hilario. From the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, Engineer Jose Viking Logarta Jr. And for our observers, guests and observers, from the Sabang Renewable Energy Corporation, Mr. Atem Ramsunder Singh. From the Confederation of Solar Developers of the Philippines, Mr. Reynaldo Casas, who is also representing the Management Association of the Philippines. Everyone has been acknowledged, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Committee Secretary. And before we proceed, I want to dispense some administrative procedures for the committee.
Mr. Chair, I move for that this committee adopts and subscribes to the pertinent provisions of the rules of the Senate and the rules of procedure governing inquiries in aid of legislation.
Any objection? Hearing none, the motion is carried. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today in this hearing. And today we'll be hearing Senate Bill number 175. The title is Promoting the Use of Microgrid Systems for the Total Electrification of Unserved and Underserved Areas. During our last hearing, during the 17th Congress, we had a hearing on the government's plan of total electrification here in our country. And it was disclosed to us there's still approximately 2.3 million households which are not electrified o wala pong kuryente doon sa mga lugar na yon. And one of the goals of this bill is to accelerate the total electrification program of our country by using new and innovative technologies such as the microgrid. And another goal of this bill is to simplify the process, as we know that a lot of our good ideas and good projects is being hampered by red tape. It's being hampered by processes that are not necessary. And one of the goals of this bill is to clearly identify the processes and reduce red tape so that we employ and encourage the private sector to come in, use private capital and help the government to roll out its total electrification plan. The goal of the government is to have a total electrification of the entire nation by 2022. No? So ibig sabihin, wala na pong walang kuryente dito ho sa ating bansa by 2022. This is a tall order considering that we are an archipelagic country. That's why the committee sees fit to use new technology, innovative technologies, and the use of private capital to reach total electrification by 2022. With that in mind, we'd like to also hear any comments from the Vice Chairman. Wala naman pong comments. We will now go and proceed into the discussion of Senate Bill number 175. We'd like to hear from the Department of Energy, being the primary department that will roll out this bill. We would like to hear some comments and also any suggestions to improve this bill.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and Vice Chair. Good morning to everybody. Well, the Department of Energy would like to express its full support to Senate Bill number 175. And we are currently discussing all the provisions within internally at the DOE, and we will submit our minor revisions or minor recommendations towards the end. Thank you very much.
Yun lang. Sino man?
Instead nagde-decide lang kami nung total electrification. This will actually support our move towards the total electrification. Thank you.
Wala ka bang comment kung paano i-roll out, kung klaro ba, kung ano bang any any detailed comment other than the support?
Yeah, thank you again, Mr. Chair. But the proposed bill is actually aligned with our QTP program, and this will allow also the bill further strengthen the role of the DOE in identifying the unserved and underserved areas. So there will be no more need for confirmation if the distribution utilities, for whatever reason, fall short in providing electricity services in certain areas without the DU itself declaring the area to be unviable. Then it would be the function of the DOE to determine whether these areas can be offered to the private sector. And the bill also is aligned with our proposed revision on the QTP rules. The minor difference that we see is that instead of the Department of Energy doing the competitive selection process for the private sector or the QTPs to come in, it would be the distribution utilities themselves who should conduct the competitive selection process, but under the directive and supervision of the Department of Energy. At the very least, it would be the distribution utility themselves that will enter into the qualified third-party service contract. So it's an agreement between the DU and the third party. That means the private sector who will come in, for how long and what would be the appropriate manner of providing electricity services.
Before we continue, recognize presence of Senator Amy Marcos. Ma'am. Sige po, Director.
So, thank you very much. Good morning, ma'am. So aside from that, it appears that the proposed Senate Bill 175 is somewhat aligned with our proposed revision of the QTP procedures in selecting the private sector. That's the reason why we see that the Senate bill is in time for us to proceed with our total electrification master planning, and this will further augment our completing our target of total electrification by the year 2022. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thank you. Director, you made mention of the qualified third party, the QTP program. And the QTP program, the technology that they use under this program is typically a microgrid system. Tama po ba?
Your Honor, thank you very much. Not necessarily a microgrid system, because the QTP, we allow QTP to provide electricity services in unviable areas which have dispersed households. In that sense, microgrid may not be the appropriate technologies, but rather individuals' systems which are equivalent to distributed energy system. That means, for example, a solar home systems, the Department of Energy, together with the Access to Sustainable Energy Program, has developed a concept. We call it the photovoltaic mainstreaming concept, wherein a prepaid metering system is applied to solar home system, and it is the distribution utility that operates, manages, and accountable for the operation and maintenance of the system. This can also be applied by the qualified third-party participants. They can also use the same system, and they can even further promote it by probably providing bigger services or bigger distributed energy systems, not limited to solar, but combinations with other systems. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair, Director Marasigan, meron na naman ho kayong mapping for that? Like, yung mga areas na pwedeng microgrid, yung pwede for itong sinasabi niyong solar homes. Meron ho bang ganun yung DOE ngayon?
Meron po kaming, thank you very much, ma'am. Meron po kaming initial listing of the unviable areas, but currently we are still validating some of these areas. We are still awaiting the full documentation of all distribution utilities, particularly the electric cooperatives in rural areas. We're waiting for their final submissions of these unviable areas. By the way, Your Honor, we are targeting not only the unserved areas, but also the underserved areas to make the services available 24/7. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Director, in terms of technology, you can use microgrids or solar home systems. At least for now, that these are the most popular technologies that we can use for unserved areas. Ngayon, meron na tayong qualified third-party program, no? But obviously, just looking at the number of operators in the QTP, I understand meron dalawang operators under the QTP program. And I also understand that there are a lot of barriers to entry for the private sector to join in the QTP program. The QTP program under EPIRA is meant to attract private capital to come in, no? So that yung mga unviable areas under EPIRA can be made can be offered to the private sector, and they take the risk in electrifying all of these areas. Ngayon, I understand also that DOE identified 900 plus unviable areas, no? Of which only 2 operators that has, correct me if I am wrong, that has less than, out of the 900, ilan areas? 10? 10 or 11? Ilan? 7 areas?
Your Honor, actually we have already new entrants, particularly in the Carmarines. So there we have 3 entities, and we have about 14 target areas for QTP
So
program.
14 plus the existing
Yeah.
of
Not together.
14
Yeah.
out of the 900.
Yes.
So that's less than 2% of the total identified areas. So obviously, may barrier ho for the private sector to come in. Now, this bill is meant to solve those barriers, no? This bill is meant to eliminate those barriers, both legally as well as process-wise, no? And I want you to explain to us, no, to the committee, how this bill can help the department come up with a very successful QTP program. Because meron na tayong QTP eh. No? The question here now is, kung may QTP tayo, bakit pa kailangan ng batas? No? So, the intention of this bill is to solve the legal impediments of the existing QTP programs as disclosed by the department in the past. No? One of the barriers is the waiver that should be, the waiver that the ECs or the DUs should execute in order for the private sector to come in. Some of the DUs are progressive enough to issue that waiver. Some of them are not, because that's giving up market and lowering down potential income for them. But in that case, it also hampers the electrification of the country. So I just want, the Director, I just want you to itemize one by one how this bill can solve the QTP program. And ano pa yung nakikita niyong dapat ipasok sa bill para po maging mas successful pa itong QTP program natin.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Well, there are several items that we have seen that we can take advantage. Number one is defining the roles between the Department of Energy and the Energy Regulatory Commission. Definitely, it will be a lot helpful for the cost of microgrid system if the Energy Regulatory Commission can now mandate the penetration limit or how far the services of a certain DU can achieve on a year-per-year basis. And by setting the different parameters, then this will serve as the ultimate guide of the distribution utilities to either pursue the electrification by themselves or leave it up to the private sector to do the electrification program. On the part of the Department of Energy, the bill actually strengthens the role of the DOE, wherein the DOE now can declare unviable areas with or without the waiver of the distribution utilities. In that sense, the entry of the private sector would not be subject to the intention of the distribution utilities in terms of providing waivers to unenergized or underserved areas. And as the Honorable Chair had mentioned, it's not only the waiver, but also the board resolution that support the waiver. So we believe that these two major parameters would help both the Department of Energy and the Energy Regulatory Commission. And also, providing the penalties and prohibited acts, then of course this will further augment or accelerate the total electrification of the country, not only in providing the private sector a clear avenue on how they can participate in pursuing total electrification of the country. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Ang iksi mo talaga sumagot, ano, Director. Parang matipid kang...
Mr. Chair, Director Marasigan, di ba, we just, yung batas ng, well, we just granted yung franchise ng solar ng bayan. May nakikita ho ba kayong potential conflict between solar ng bayan and this bill?
So far po, we don't see naman kasi we have not received yet what particular areas or unserved areas that the solar para sa bayan has targeted. And as the franchise given to the solar para sa bayan, it is subject to confirmation and approval of the DOE. So at the moment po, wala pa po kami nakikitang conflict. Thank you.
Director, how do you envision, now solar para sa bayan is now a law, no? How do you envision operationalizing solar para sa bayan and this bill, no? Kumbaga meron ka ng isang operator that is almost nationwide in scope, no? Because it has identified specific areas for them to enter, no? And then you have this microgrid bill that is aimed to attract microgrid operators, service providers to come in also, most likely in the same areas, no? Kung meron kayong listahan ng unserved, underserved, unserved, unviable, si Solar para sa Bayan will have the same list, and they will be now entering into the same areas. How do you now envision both laws, no? Kung ito po ay magiging batas, how do you envision operationalizing both laws?
Mr. Chair, siguro to be specific, baka we can cite a certain area. For example, Palawan. paano ho pag sabay na pumasok?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair and Vice Chair. Actually, what we see at the moment is that for the solar para sa bayan, it will be a franchise. There will be a franchise owner, so it will be carved out from the franchise of the distribution utility. But this solar para sa bayan would now have the role to provide the electricity services in that area, applying the most reasonable and reasonably priced technology and at the appropriate technology that can better serve the communities. But should there be areas that will not be within that certain franchise area of solar para sa bayan, which it cannot provide the services, I believe that this microgrid bill will now allow other private sectors to come in. Now, the qualified third party or the MSP contract will now be between solar para sa bayan and the MSP rather than the distribution utility and the QTP participants.
Mr. Chair. So, ibig sabihin ba ng Director Marasigan, pag nandun na yung solar para sa bayan, hindi na pwedeng pasukin ng microgrid?
Pwede pa po. It would be the obligation first of the solar para sa bayan na mag-provide ng electricity services because it will now have its franchise. So, mawawala na yung distribution utility or the EC. For example, in Palawan, mawawala ng role si Paleco, if that is Paleco's franchise area. But the responsibility of providing the services to the households will now be under the franchise ni Solar para sa Bayan. If Solar para sa Bayan cannot do it, then this bill can allow private sector because as indicated here or as provided by the proposed bill, the DOE can declare unserved areas whoever is the franchise holder.
Director, parang lagi niyong sinasabi, if solar para sa bayan cannot do it. What if solar para sa bayan can do it and then may microgrid?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, yung microgrid per se is a technology. So yung application ng technology can be applied by solar para sa bayan. It doesn't mean kasi na solar para sa bayan, the way I see it, will provide electricity services using specific technology. No, it can still adapt various technology, hybrid system, microgrid system. In that sense, it would be the obligation of solar para sa bayan bilang the franchise holder in the area to provide electricity services. Obligasyon niya na ngayon na mag-provide ng services doon sa mga household. But should solar para sa bayan cannot do it, then the private sector can still come in.
And then they will be under solar para sa bayan?
Yeah, the service contract will be between the solar para sa bayan and the QTP or the MSP.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes. As earlier mentioned by our good Senator Nancy Binay, ang tinatanong po natin, asan ba yung distribution plan? Yung distribution development plan? Kasi parati natin naririnig na magkakaroon ng 100% sa 2022 or 2040. Medyo magulo yung plano ninyo. At ang ninanais natin, alamin, sapagkat klarong-klaro naman, I think that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to our energy woes. As a result, it's important that we finally see exactly what the DOE plans so that we achieve the 100% electrification. As it is, nakakahiya na po tayo, nag-umpisa tayo noong dekada 60, 70, ang aga-aga po natin mag-umpisa ng rural electrification. Pero hanggang ngayon, hindi pa tayo nasa 100% katulad ng ating mga kapitbahay ng Indonesia, Vietnam, and the rest, who have far outstripped the Philippines in accomplishing their 100% electrification goals. Asan ba yung plano ninyo sa distribution? There's a clear preference for renewable energy. Klaro yan, yung RE mangunguna hanggat kaya, dapat RE. Di ba? Maliwanag yan sa batas. Subalit, eto nga, as duly observed by Attorney Di Malanta and NREB in their position paper, klaro naman there's a preference for renewable energy. Meron ba kayong klarong distribution plan? Kasi nga, wala naman iisang solusyon. Where will you put, or do you see solar, wind, and the rest? Where are you going to indicate the microgrids? Where are you going to put hybridization for diesel plants, and so on and so forth? Marami na pong solusyon. Kaya lang, saan ba yung plano? Kasi hindi pa rin klaro sa amin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Senator. Yes, annually we update the distribution development plan based on the submissions of the distribution utilities. But aside from that,
Hinihingi ko po eh. I think I went to your office and
Yes, ma'am.
I was requesting a distribution plan, even in the most schematic form, just so we knew the direction of the DOE, but nothing has so far been presented.
my apologies, ma'am, if you have not yet received our submission. I'll try to check whether these submissions have already been made. Nonetheless, ma'am, aside from the distribution development plan, we have also our missionary electrification master plan that is for the off-grid areas. And then to further augment this, the DOE is now formulating the total electrification master plan for 2022. And this aims 100% electrification of the remaining to unenergized household in the country. And as I have mentioned earlier, the total electrification master plan will not cover only the unserved areas, but also those classified as underserved areas. Those areas that are provided with electricity services, but less than 24 hours in 7 days. So we are still in the process of collating the submissions of the different distribution utilities,
Yes.
and we are having difficulties in terms of submission coming from the electric cooperatives.
Yes,
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the concern is that whereas it's been indicated that we are at 95.27% electrified, the reality is when you break it down on a region-to-region level, this is quite deceptive. At yun ang tinatanong ko, kasi hanggang ngayon, ang plano po ninyo, region per region pa lang. At hindi ina-address specifically yung maliwanag na mga regions na underserved and totally unserved. Nangunguna na rito yung BARM, syempre, no? Alam na natin yung BARM nangunguna. Ikalawa yung Region 9. Maliwanag din yan, na kulang. Region 12, di ba? Nandyan lahat. Pero ang problema, pag tinatanong kayo, ilan yung households na target? Sabihin man lang, ano yung plano sa kada munisipyo? Kahit yung mga sitio at barangay, wala namang maibigay yung DOE. So, paano natin ma-accomplish yung 100% na yan kung napakalabo po ng plano? Or wala totally na plano?
Thank you very much, ma'am. As I have mentioned earlier, we are still in the process of collating.
Boss, nasa midterm report na tayo, no?
Yes, po.
Hanggang 2022 lang si Presidente Duterte at dapat magbigay na tayo ng report card ng grade. Midterm report, hanggang ngayon wala pa plano. We're halfway through. We only have 3 years to go. We need to push this. As stated earlier, our performance so far has been more or less disgraceful in the past 2 decades, given that we started so early in the rural electrification program. And to date, we are still not 100%, unlike the rest of our neighbors who started a mere decade ago.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Yes, we do understand po the concern, and that's why we appreciate po the proposed Senate bill, because it will, as I mentioned earlier, it will greatly help facilitate the entry of the private sector in providing electricity services, which in the past has been difficult for them. Aside from that, in nga po ma'am, we have seen the concern that we cannot identify so far on a household per household basis yung different
Wala ba kayong specific plans sa very clearly underserved areas or totally unserved areas in Mindanao? Wala ba kayong maliwanag na plano dyan? Magbubuhos ang Kongreso ng limpak-limpak na salapi para sa BARM. Wala ba kayong plano dyan? Kasi hingi kami ng hingi, wala naman na ibibigay. Nakita naman natin ang sitwasyon ng Mindanao. Napakahirap.
Indulgence, Senator Aimee, let me acknowledge presence of Senator Tolentino and Senator De La Rosa. Good morning, sirs.
So, Mr. Chair, kung maaari, hihingi lang ako ng plano kasi nasa midterm na tayo ng grading period. Bakit wala pa yung mahiwagang plano, higit sa lahat para sa Mindanao? Yung priorities natin dyan. The other question is, in the socio-economic report ng NEDA, merong National Unified Strategy for Total Electrification. Pwede po humingi ng kopya nun kasi matagal ko nang inaasam-asam na aralin yan so that we can finally understand this. But we are halfway through the President's term and there's no copy yet available.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And my apologies if we have not yet sent the unified strategy for total electrification. But we will, when we go back to the office, then I will make sure that this plan will be provided to your office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. If we could have the data requested so we can move forward on this, not only on the microgrids that we have agenda today, but for all the other electrification and energy options that are replete in the present age. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to follow up dun sa point ni Senator Marcos. Parang sinasabi niyo kasi we don't have a plan yet. How about an old plan? Meron ho ba kayo?
Yes, ma'am. We have the Missionary Electrification Development Plan, and it identifies which areas, particularly those in off-grid areas, are not yet served, and the different strategies being used by the combined resources of the National Power Corporation, the National Electrification Administration, through the distribution utilities.
Anong time frame ho ng plan na yan?
Ano yung latest natin? Ano yung latest natin na MEDP? 2020? Hindi, pero anong horizon? Yeah. Ma'am, it's actually a 2016 MEDP, or the Missionary Electrification Development Program. Ma'am, meron po akong binigay nung mag-visit kayo. May binigay po akong isang parang textbook na yun yung mismong Missionary Electrification
Mr. Chair,
Development
can
Plan.
we just, can the committee request a copy?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we will provide po copies of the MEDP as well as the latest publication of the Distribution Development Plan. Thank you. Hindi pa po, ma'am.
Paano yung National Unified Strategy
Ay,
ng NEDA? Kasi yun ang hinihingi nila dahil sabi nga nila, hindi daw sasabit kailanman yung DOE.
we will provide nga po you the copy with what we have already formulated.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems there is no national unified strategy, whether with regard to microgrids or renewable energy or hybridized diesel plants. So may we request that DOE submit this at the earliest possible time. It's budget season, as you know. It's important that we know what the plan is so that somehow we can put our money where our mouth is, truly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we will submit po. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, siguro ano ho bang target date nyo para matapos tong plano?
2022 ata?
Hindi, 2022. No, yung completion of their study.
Ma'am, actually, we are having difficulties on the submissions of the distribution utilities, particularly the electric cooperatives. But the plan should have been prepared as early as May this year. Thank you.
Sige, Mario, basahin ko lang to, para naintindihan natin. Ang rine-require ng NEDA, kasi hindi nga kayo nagsasubmit, a master plan, including the inventory of unserved and underserved, list of ongoing programs and projects, list of proposed programs and projects, recommendations, and a list of potential partners. Pati yung NEDA, ang tagal nang hinihingi yan last year, ngayon hinihingi na namin ulit, wala pa rin.
Yes po, ma'am. We will po. Thank you.
Just to reiterate, Director Mario, we had a hearing on August 13, 2018, and April 1st, 2018 and August 2018, precisely to talk about the national total electrification program. And during those hearings, we requested from your department a comprehensive rollout plan to include budgets, no? Dahil in-identify nyo through different categories kung anong klaseng mga communities ang walang kuryente and what type of technology ang gagamitin for those communities. The next is how to reach those communities and how much do you need in order to reach those communities. Yun ang missing link ngayon. And you've been telling us that the electric co-ops as well as the other DUs are not submitting to you. But you are the Department of Energy who has supervising powers over all of these distribution utilities. So you have to exert a lot of pressure and to a certain extent sanction them kung hindi binibigay sa inyo yung data, because this is vital for us to know so that we can allocate the necessary budgets for you to roll out a nationwide total electrification plan. So yun po yung matagal na namin, biro nyo August 2018 yun. I thank Senator Marcos for reminding the committee again, no, because we've been asking for this for a very long time. And Senator Marcos is requesting Secretary Cusi to appear before us to shed light on this total electrification program. And I share the sentiment, Senator Marcos. One of the most important reason for the department's existence is to make sure that we have electricity in all of our households. And the target is 2022. No? Kung wala tayong strategy, hindi natin makakamit yung 2022. And Director, we've been appearing before this committee, guaranteeing to us that you will have a strategy. But until now, and again, thank you to Senator Marcos for raising this again, we really need to have a commitment from the department in terms of the total electrification program for the country. And I share the sentiment because Senator Marcos comes from Ilocos Norte, na marami pa tayong bahay doon na wala pang kuryente, no? So to move forward, kanina sinabi niyo itong mga plans nandyan na submit to this committee not later than Thursday all of the items that Senator Marcos mentioned. On top of that, to heed to the call of Senator Marcos, we will again have a dedicated hearing on the total electrification program of the department, no? So that we can go deeper into the issues. And we all share that sentiment because 2022 is fast approaching. Nung pinag-usapan natin to 2018, we were waiting for a commitment, but 2022 is fast approaching, and we need to have a strategy. And we also need to have that kind of budget in order to fulfill the strategy. So we will schedule a hearing, Senator Marcos, so that we can go deeper into the issues. So, all right. With that, I still have some question to Director Marsigan, but since we have a few resource persons for today, and we will go resource person by resource person to talk about the Microgrid Systems Act, no? Because this bill is meant to address the legal gaps as well as policy gaps in terms of the nationwide total electrification program of the government. So with that, we move to NREB, Attorney Di Malanta. And thank you for your position paper. It's very informative. In fact, we will include a lot of your suggestions to the bill, but you can articulate your position paper.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and good morning, honorable senators. So we submitted our position paper, the National Renewable Energy Board's position paper on the draft on SB 175. And like the Department of Energy, we fully support, of course, I think nobody in the room would counter any program that would promote total electrification in the country. We also, in our position paper, identified certain sections of the draft bill that we hope can be considered by the committee in terms of enhancing the draft or the language of the legislation, particularly in identifying objective parameters in the determination of underserved, unserved areas in particular, because we feel these are the more contentious portions of the bill. But in particular, because we're NREB, well, the main recommendation we have is if the committee could consider putting a categorical language for preferring renewable energy resources in the promotion of microgrid systems. We feel that there is sufficient legislative basis for this, and this is more aligned or consistent with the state's objectives already articulated in existing legislations. This would also mean that any implementation of the Microgrid Systems Bill or Act, when it becomes a law, will be aligned with existing programs of the pursuant to the Renewable Energy Act, which already recognizes preference for renewable energy being adopted by distribution utilities and also consumers and renewable energy suppliers under existing programs. That's our main recommendation, Your Honors.
Thank you, Attorney. I do agree that part of the strategy to achieve total electrification nationwide is to use distributed energy system. And most likely, the most economical distributed energy system are renewable energies, particularly solar. Right now, the traditional method is using diesel in off-grid areas. But diesel is susceptible to fluctuations. Therefore, the most economical next to diesel will be solar or a hybrid system. And we do agree that we should embed in the law to encourage the use of renewable systems, energy systems, in the microgrid systems that we are tackling today. We'd like to also ask your, you send us position paper. We would like to also ask for a much detailed language. No? I know this is a preliminary position paper, so that we can study how to put your ideas in the said bill. No? I do agree that somehow we should incorporate in the bill the use of renewable energy systems.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yes, ma'am. Now, just to address that particular question, we are preparing a markup version of the bill. But as you know, the board is composed of multi-stakeholder representation. So I need to get the concurrence of the rest of the members in order to formally submit our detailed recommendations. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chair, may I just at this juncture, since we're talking about renewables, and I was for a long time the governor of what has become the poster province for renewables, maybe please include in the Microgrid Systems Act that you have filed the consultation and the participation of the local government units, particularly with microgrids and renewables, inasmuch as their livelihood, their ecosystem, and so many other issues are impacted upon very, very deeply. And yet, the permits are issued by DOE and the rest of the energy regulatory boards without any compunction, without any information for the local government. I think also we are speaking about the different solutions as if they were exclusive of each other, when in fact our experience in Ilocos Norte has been very clear that we can combine renewables. They can, in fact, be piggybacked upon each other so that the intermittence that is endemic to every renewable system will be reduced. For example, in Burgos, we are now combining solar during the wind poor season together with wind so that it's an all year round affair. So we are up to 50-60% renewable at peak season. So nababawasan na yung slow season at nadadagdagan during peak. Isa yun. The other question also is that perhaps with microgrids, we can input also a provision, if I may, Mr. Chair, regarding the ownership of the locals. We have seen that, and we have started with a 1 megawatt solar plant, and it is owned by the electric co-op and eventually to be owned by the farmers who leased out the land. So this is an experiment that we are starting, that eventually the power producers will be the farmers from whom the land was leased after 10, 15 years, or whenever ROI and the rest of the financial requirements are met, maibabalik at yung magiging power producer mismo yung mga magsasaka. So we are trying to do that, and that's being done now in Sarat and Dingras. So we have more than proof of concept. Kung sana maisingit po yon sa microgrid bill ninyo, malaking bagay po yan sa atin. At yun nga, to encourage yung combination ng iba't ibang sources.
Thank you, Senator Marcos, and let me commend Senator Marcos for coming up with a provincial ordinance, no, that will exclusively or prohibit fossil fuel from being set up in the province of Ilocos Norte. So, in line with your advocacy for a cleaner future, Ilocos Norte will not be hosting any fossil fuel projects from now on and in the future. No? So,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I don't recommend it nationwide, pero sa amin po kasi ang dami po namin assets, resources, and other capabilities to generate renewables. Kaya sa palagay namin, wag na muna mag-coal at yung iba pang fossil fuels. I'd also like to tell the committee that we now have the first master's degree in engineering for renewable energy in the Mariano Marcos State University, which the chairman has kindly visited.
thank you, Senator Marcos. And also for NREB, no, I'd like to also request a simulation. No? For example, you've been advocating the use of renewable energy in microgrid system compared to a traditional diesel-fired power plant. You know, because we also need to lay the case using economics and using savings to convince our consumers that renewable energy systems is in fact cheaper than traditional diesel-fired power plant. So aside from the concept of giving electricity, but it's also economical and it will generate savings, and we need that simulation, Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll work on that with, I think the main body that we'll work with would be NPC SPOG, since they are on ground in terms of information. But we do have information obtained from, as you know, the board has no staff of its own. So we'll rely on the DOE staff also. But we've been discussing that also because we've been updating in relation to the Honorable Senator's statement earlier on a plan. We've been updating the National Renewable Energy Program. We're working with the staff at the DOE, the REMB, to update the National Renewable Energy Program because it was a program that was developed back in 2011. There has been significant evolution of not just technology, but interest in our renewable energy program. Yes, ma'am. Apa. So we're working on that, and I think all those information are collated and will be available as we go through this exercise, and we'll provide a copy to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. Our next speaker will be NPC, Mr. Rene Baruela. Any comments po, sir?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As mentioned by our colleagues here, we fully support the SB 175. We have initially drafted comments with regards to SB 175. We'll be sending it probably today because we're still waiting some comments from our colleagues from the ground, from the operations. But initially, we have one-page comments. If you may, I can already mention it here, or we'll just send it to your office.
I-ano nyo lang, sir, yung pinaka-gist ng comments nyo.
Yeah, basically, sir, our comments that we like to request for the inclusion of the definition of the machinery electrification. Hindi po kasi nakalagay doon sa draft. Also, considering that the MSPs or the microgrid systems will still be subsidized in the missionary areas, then we'd like to request that specifically the Rule 13 of Republic Act 9136, Section 3, the obligation of SPAG could be also considered to be included in the bill, since SPAG would still be paying for the subsidy for these MSPs in the future. Another thing is that in order for before we actually discuss the QTPs, but in this case, probably in the future, it will be called MSPs. I think one of the barriers there is the approval of the application, especially on the tariff. So medyo matagal ang proseso from PSA to actual approval. So that might have to be included in the bill, or it will be streamlined. Actually, our request is to streamline the process. Because otherwise, kung hindi po may streamline yung process, NPC will be advancing the cost of this MSP. And it would really affect our financial stability kung hindi po ma-aprobahan kaagad ang request ng subsidy ng mga microgrid providers. And also, being the generation company, we'd like to request also the committee to also consider NPC as part of the generation company as last resort, if there will be no takers. Because there are a lot of still unelectrified, unserved areas na ginagawa po din namin. So, the committee might want to consider that for SPAG would still continue its rule in the missionary electrification as a last resort participant. That's all, sir.
Sir, I have a basic question. Nakita ko sa mga requests nyo, bumibili pa kayo ng mga generators. Tama?
Yes, sir. Bumibili pa kami.
Meron ba kayong mga hybrid na generators?
Yes, sir.
Solar hybrid generators?
Yes, sir. We just completed one in Limasawa. It's a solar diesel hybrid. And then we are bidding out two systems in Bohol. So that's actually part of our missionary electrification plant now.
So moving forward, your purchases will be hybrid generators.
Yes, sir. It will be.
So wala na yung traditional just gensets. Puro hybrid na yung mga bibilin yung moving forward.
Moving forward, sir, we still have to buy some diesel gensets because we cannot just rely on solar. Although solar PV, the cells are cheaper now as compared to probably 20 years ago. However, the batteries, the storage, they're still very expensive. So we still have to study on the pros and cons of, how much will be the diesel, how much will be the solar or the wind. So we still have to balance the whole system.
Yep, I've seen countless studies that hybrid system now is really the most economical in off-grid areas. That's already a settled concept. And I just want to flag the NPC or NPC that we have to seriously look into this technology, because I've seen a lot of requests from NPC, especially budget season na ngayon. But a lot of them are just generators. You have to really defend bakit mas economical ang generators versus hybrid systems, because the new technology now are really moving into the hybrid system. So in a later date, we'll probe deeper into that, but I want I'm urging the organization to look into this technology, because come budget season, we will also probe into the use of hybrid systems moving forward, especially in off-grid areas.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, National Power Corporation has been looking about, using these renewable technologies. If I remember, since the 90s, actually we started developing wind in the area of Ilocos Norte. Our group actually was the one responsible for studying putting up wind turbines in the Ilocos Norte. That was in the early 90s. We're doing the Burgos up to Caparispisan, in Bangue. We've been doing the study, sir. Actually, for hybrid, we've been doing that since the late 90s also. We've been working with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of the US for that. So it's really part of our blood na actually, yung renewable.
Just make sure that's reflected in your request during budget season, because I scrutinize the purchases of NPC. Early 90s, nasa Ilocos Norte na kayo.
15 years before.
Yes, sir.
21 years old pa lang nun si Governor Aimee. No?
Actually, we started there when I was with PNOC pa. Late 80s. PNOC was the original actually who put up the wind mast in Ilocos Norte, in Burgos. And then when I transferred with Asa National Power Corporation, we started working, I think, mid-90s yata. So we've been going to Ilocos every month for the data gathering. And then the data, it was included in the wind mapping that was prepared by the National Renewable Energy Lab. That's the reason why Ilocos Norte has been prioritized for the development of wind.
Thank you, sir. Next is Engineer Viking Lagarta, Viking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the members of the committee. We in our institute have given the draft a really careful reading, and we are convinced that it is consistent with our work and campaign to promote electricity access to areas that have been left out of mainstream economic development. As you said, Mr. Chairman, there are many studies already that incorporating RE systems into the microgrids is the most economical way to go. We find that the measure is urgent because it provides a systematic, speedy, and transparent process given the uncertainty and inconsistencies in the current sphere of regulation. We also consider it timely and responsive to the current administration's thrust of inclusive development underpinned by low-carbon energy infrastructure. Though the procedures outlined in the measure may not be aligned with the ambitious schedule of the executive branch, we think these are better than a resort to shortcuts that only lead to confusion and unsustainable results. We have identified some of the details that we think bedevil the measure. Among these are the issues in the mandated competitive selection process that also apply to the CSP in the main grids. Will offers be based on fixed prices, and will terms be fixed uniformly? Number two, the non-entitlement of non-NPC SPUG areas to the subsidy from the universal charge for missionary electrification. There is as yet no clear rationale provided for this. Also, there is no explanation of the annual penetration limits that are supposed to be determined by the ERC. While the provision to do away with waivers from affected utilities is noteworthy, these utilities have always been constrained from providing extensions because the question of viability is linked to the tariff setting process and the business model. Should these utilities be given space to compete with the newcomers is is a question that we raise. Finally, there is always the question of what details should be delegated to the executive and quasi-judicial branches, given recent experience of conflicting interpretations of intent. Also, the legislature, if it can, needs to ensure that the measure is shielded from court challenges to the extent possible, given our litigious system. Our institute will actively participate in the resolution of the issues mentioned and commit our support through data and analytics with our limited resources. Mr. Chairman, I would like to answer some questions that you posed to the other resource persons. With respect to hybridization, Mr. Chairman, there's already been a simulation done by a component of the EU ASEP on more than 20, I think, NPC SPAG islands. And this study actually calculated for each island the optimum degree of the capacity of solar with respect to the diesel capacity. So this study is available. It was presented last year. And then, Mr. Chairman, there are also cases where actually simulations are not needed because the plain algebra of hybridization is that if the existing diesel capacity with a sunk cost is there in an island, and the levelized cost of solar energy is less than the fuel cost, hybridizing will lead to lower total system cost, because the cheaper solar is just displacing the fuel, and the diesel plant is already a sunk cost. So, there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Engineer Viking. I have a comment on that ASEP. No, on paper, it seems attractive, no, and economical using hybrid systems. But I've seen yung NPC set up in the provinces. Normally nakabarred yan eh, or malapit sa pier, no, yung generator. I was wondering actually, if you turn that into a hybrid system, saan mo ilalagay yung solar? Kasi kailangan mo na malaking lupa eh. Kay Mr. Viking, that's what's missing in the ASEP study, because for example, in a municipality that requires, let's say lang, 10 megawatt. So you will need now to put up, for example, hybrid system now, you need to put up solar panels. But typically where the generator is, wala siyang lupa for solar. So meaning he has to look for, NPC has to look for land in order to put that solar panel. No? So there is a tricky problem there on how to convert. No? They didn't take into account the physical aspect of that hybrid plant, because yung generators maliliit lang yan, isang 1/4 na kwarto kaya na yung generator, pero yung solar kailangan mo na malaking lupa, and that's where the constraint of NPC comes in terms of transitioning to hybrid. I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm just saying na yung land constraint becomes an issue, a realistic issue on the ground in terms of transitioning into a hybrid system that we need to contend with later on. No?
Yeah, I think you're correct, Mr. Chairman. That was really an omission in the EU ASEP study.
We can flag. I know Viking is very active in the ASEP. We can incorporate that, no, that thought, because kailangan mo talagang ng lupa para magkabit ng solar. Yun ang hindi nila na take into account. No? And we need to lease that land. Paano kung ayaw magpaupa yung kapitbahay mo? Or mas mahaling papaupa niya sa'yo dahil alam niya kailangan mo. Then it becomes a cost constraint. No?
Although, Mr. Chairman, when we calculate levelized cost for solar, that already incorporates all the costs, including potential land costs. Yeah.
Thank you. Sir, do you have any comment?
Mr. Chairman. Yeah, actually we support your Mr. Chairman, your thought about it. It's a challenge, really, particularly if you're using solar for a hybrid system, because it would require about 1.6 hectares for a megawatt. So for the existing plants, which we are planning to to include solar or wind as a hybrid system, it's really a big challenge. However, for the new areas that we are right now eyeing or planning, when we identify sites for the diesel, we include the site for the solar. So when we look for the sites, it should include the site for the solar also. So we have those in our consideration, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Next is PSPI, Engineer Hilario. I think you're one of the QTP operators, no? It's good to hear from you your on-the-ground experience as well as bottlenecks in terms of application, in terms of dealing with government. And we'd like to hear from you opportunities also, how to expand, because one of the thrust of government is to attract private capital to come into the missionary areas, no? And PSPI has been a pioneer in this field, and we want to understand also from your experience how to develop this microgrid systems in the Philippines.
Maraming salamat po, Honorable Chair, and to the members of the committee. Good morning po. Just to clarify lang po, I don't want to misrepresent. I'm not a licensed engineer po, sir. I am the Executive Director and President of Power Source Philippines, but not an engineer po.
Malabo na yung mata ko, ang basa
I understand it's against the law to also misrepresent a profession. I don't want to get in trouble here. But just a background lang po, yes, Power Source Philippines po is the very first qualified third party QTP in our country. Rio Tuba in Palawan, Barangay Rio Tuba in Palawan, way back in 2008. No? Currently po, we actually operate and manage 7 QTP sites. So earlier, Director Marasigan said there's currently around 14 po. No? Of the 7 existing sites po, 6 are located in Palawan, 1 is in Cebu, in the island of Malapascua. Of the 7 sites po, 4 currently enjoy subsidies. And the last 3 po has been endorsed by the Department of Energy for the approval of our tariff application with the Energy Regulatory Commission. We do have 1 site po, but we're still in talks with the NPC and the for Balut Island in Mindanao. That's our 8th site po prospectively. With the permission of the committee din po, because I'm here to represent our chairman, Mr. Nonoy Coleco, but I'd like to share my, if you would permit lang po, my personal views as a citizen po on the bill that is being passed. I'd like to humbly point out 4 lang po. I apologize that we do not have the benefit of formal position paper. The first one po that we'd like to commend the committee is when we define as a policy rural development, but I would like to submit to the committee to reconsider what is exactly the definition of this, because it has an implication on the benchmark rate setting process that would be eventually deliberated by the ERC. What do I mean by this po? Normally po, when we submit our applications, again, we can only see as far as the immediate years. But as I understand it, the current rate setting process po, if we need to put additional capital investments in a particular site, we would need to wait for the prescribed period. And the reality po in the remote areas, in the first 3 years, then it would be as what you foresee, low consumption because people do not have disposable income, they only have a light bulb and some basic necessities. But in the next 3 to 5 years, if we really succeed in promoting rural development, when businesses come in, the demand increases. And it's common po, in our experience of the 7 sites we've operated, or at least the older ones, our forecasts were very conservative. In fact, it's like good news and bad news. Good news is you know that it's really spurring development. The bad news is you're actually constrained to actually keep up with the demand, and we're bound to serve the areas that we cannot say no to the community. And the current rate benchmark, the rate setting process would not actually allow you to keep up with that development, or at least going through the process. The second point is related to that. In the proposed bill, it alludes to that the end of the the contract term, we are supposed to turn over the assets to the existing franchise holder. But the bill is silent on what would be the what would be the valuation, would we be fully compensated. In our existing QTP contracts po, normally we would have termination provisions if I am in default or the NPC in default, and we would agree on the net present value of the remainder of the contract. But the implication here is if the development in the remote area has accelerated, it's actually a disincentive for the service provider to put in additional capex on its 5th year, 6th year, knowing that I don't have an assurance if I can fully recover these investments. So it would actually, if it's ambiguous, it would actually stall development in the said areas. And as a case study, I can point out cases like Ryutuba or Liminangkong when we started, less than 100 houses, now it's 1,000 plus. Or Liminangkong, normally Barangay Liminangkong in the municipality of Taytay in Palawan, it started as a fishing village, but with the provision of 24/7 electricity, ice storage facilities, it has encouraged investors to put up ice storage facilities or resort hotels to promote ecotourism. And we need to go back to the tariff, to the regulators. And again, if, as a private company, private sector participation, we are rational behaviors to also recover investment to maximize profits. It's a disincentive if knowing that on the last few years, I'm not even assured if I'll be fairly compensated or at least to whom we would be turning over the assets, or whether is there some certainty on the term extension. Majority of, we've always been talking about the power generation assets, but for most distribution assets like power lines, transformers, the typical useful life is 15 years, 15 to 25 years, depending on the ability to maintain. And those type of investments, if we actually want to recover in the immediate year, it would not make it it would not make our tariffs affordable to, if the intent is to take out the subsidy. The third point po, if you would permit po, is if we can rationalize the requirements required of microgrid service providers. What do I mean by this? The requirements required of a microgrid service provider are almost the same required of a very big power plant. And if the intent is actually to make electricity affordable, we are at a disadvantage. I am referring to certain, aside from regulations that we need to comply from the DOE, we also have other regulations we need to comply with the Department of DNR, with DOLE. Just to give you one example, the law prescribes that per each power plant, I should have a licensed engineer certified as a pollution controls officer or as a safety officer. Imagine I'm located in remote areas and with a barangay of 300 families. I would be very lucky if there's a licensed engineer willing to reside in that area. And if I would need to relocate someone from an urban center to these remote areas, it would be tough, but we need to comply with the law. And this structure, since my tariff structure has been pre-approved for my O&M, I cannot take the additional overhead of paying what is properly compensate these professionals. And there are more, I think with energy efficiency being passed also, there are more requirements being posed. If we really want to promote electrification in the rural areas, I believe that we should also rationalize it. We're operating a very cute power plant. Let's not overdo it. But then again, maintaining the spirit of what is intended to operate a professional plant, safety provisions are there, but at least to rationalize. The last point, sir, that I would like to submit for your consideration is that I understand that we're clearly spelling out the roles of the Department of Energy and the Energy Regulatory Commission, but there are other government agencies that are critical in promoting rural electrification. I mentioned the DNR. Land is actually the biggest, in all our tariff applications, it is silent on how do we actually recover if we need to lease land or develop land, and if it's, and most commonly we're in protected areas. So if I need to, I understand that a microgrid service provider in the bill, our contract can be reviewed if there's a complaint from the community or motu proprio. But if I want to guarantee continuous service, it's actually very difficult for us to even clear or cut trees that travel along our transmission lines, or to, if it's in public or private property. I understand the other industry player has provided this benefit in the franchise that they was given to them. I would hope that an equal privilege is also granted to the other players whose only intent is actually to serve these communities. So, yun lang po. Maraming salamat po.
ED Hilario, kanina you mentioned about yung turnover of assets. No? Is it workable that wala nang turnover of assets? Even though there's grid extension in that area, the microgrid operator continues to operate?
Our existing contracts po kasi, we do not, the franchise remains, as a QTP po, the franchise remains with the electric cooperative. So,
Parang lumalabas, interim lang ang
yes
UTP.
po, and I'm still subject if my, there's no guarantee.
It's an interim solution. What if the interim solution is the better solution? No, it offers cheaper electricity rates, it's cleaner, it's better service, and the residents there like the service. Is it a possible scenario wherein the QTP operator becomes a permanent operator?
That would be ideal po, and in fact from a business perspective, we do not mind, I could get in trouble with my boss. I understand it's not just in the Philippines, in other countries it's heavily regulated, there are more requirements. But what is difficult for private sector participation is the uncertainty. So if there's certainty that I put in this money, this investment, and then at least we can assure our investors or shareholders that you have a fair period to recover this, then I think that would lessen, that would increase the number of willing participants in the field. In our industry forums, I would always ask them, why don't you just get, it's either we are too slow in understanding the risk of the business that we're still around, or others are just simply too risk averse to serve these remote areas. But I understand, sir, that would be ideal po, if, for example, there's that certainty.
Do you think that will attract more private operators to come in?
Yes, sir, especially if, for example, the
Kasi
initial
interim
period
lang.
is,
Oo.
if the initial period is 10 years, you would normally see the development in the third or fifth year when you've actually attracted locators, or whether you've encouraged economic activity in the area. That's enough time for investors to reconsider investing. We have a particular site that when they found out that 24/7 electricity is provided, they proceeded with their investment in setting up an agro-processing facility in the barangay. And that totally changes our load forecast for that area, that we need to go back now to the, eventually, when our tariffs are evaluated, we need to show them the new facts in the area. And if we are to put up, instead of residential distribution lines, put up three-phase lines on our 6th or 7th year, it gives us comfort that at least I have another 10 years to fully recover these investments.
Thank you, Mr. Hilario. To PASEA.
I think Techi
Okay,
would be the
Techi.
one to discuss.
Yes,
for
Ms.
us.
Techi.
We have 6 main points, sir, which we
Sige.
have
Are you
already
going to use
submitted.
the,
Sorry. We have 6 main points, sir,
are you going
from
to
our
use the
group.
the
No,
slides?
no
Okay.
need, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. PASEA is grateful to the Senate Committee on Energy, specifically to its Honorable Chair, for sponsoring this Senate Bill number 175 that intends to energize remote areas and achieve 100% electrification in the country. We fully support the bill, and we hope that the bureaucratic hurdles preventing access of electricity in the underserved and unserved will be permanently removed to allow communities to have universal access to electricity and apply state-of-the-art technology. It is also our position. We have submitted, Mr. Chair, our position paper. So I would just like to elaborate on some of the items. It is also our position that aside from the hurdles that this bill hopes to remove, we also pray that it provides incentives so that the public and private sector can jointly deliver electricity in this last mile of rural electrification program of the government. We call the attention in the item in the bill where unserved and underserved areas that will be open to the microgrid service operators will not have access to subsidies. So if we are to play in a level playing field, what is available to the SPAG areas should also be available to islands and remote communities that will be eventually served by the microgrid service provider.
What you're saying, even though nasa mainland siya, pero unserved, dapat entitled siya to subsidies?
Yes, sir, because even in the mainland, let's say, for example, and this is where we want to draw attention into the definition of microgrid. Microgrid is a very, although it's an old concept, the emergence of hybridization of, or the inclusion of renewable energy into the grid makes a very unique and distinct character of the microgrid at its present day. For example, we would like to maybe have clarity. Is an island grid which exists like in the islands of El Nido, in the islands of Siargao, are they microgrids? We need to have more clarity in the definition of microgrid because this can be subject to abuse and can really instead of giving light to how we can incentivize, this may even confuse some of the providers. So should microgrid only be used as the last mile where there is no electricity at all? Or should microgrid apply to unserved? And if it's unserved, what is the geographical limitation of that? The definition is quite unclear. So our proposition is to have more discussion in this by really drawing, providing the committee with concrete examples. There are already 20 microgrid operators, and maybe we can learn as to how we can specifically define microgrid in the Philippine settings where we have 7,100 islands. So this is something that I think we hope to contribute as an industry in fine-tuning the definition of microgrid.
Actually, you opened up a very fundamental point, no, or fundamental issue in the bill, the definition of microgrids. In fact, internally, we've been discussing that, no, because right now the QTP program is for the last mile. But since, and Director Marasigan supports this, we're opening this up to underserved areas, meaning definition na underserved, less than 24. So meaning, meron siyang linya, pero less than 24. So this is, in my opinion, it's not considered last mile, no? But it's underserved. But we're opening up that avenue for the microgrid operators. Now, the underserved areas may be as small as a sitio, may be as big as a municipality. So where do we define the boundaries, no?
So that is the issue because in some of the underserved, an existing franchise area operates. And in that franchise areas, there may be lines that are already existing. Can we use their poles? How do we cooperate with them on the wheeling charges? What are the parameters for defining this? Which is why we also would like to say that in the last several years, sabi nga ho ni Jay, 2 years old pa lang daw ho siya nung tinayo yung NEA. So they have, which means that our electric cooperatives have been doing rural electrification, and their achievement in this area has to be recognized because we are just addressing now in the last mile. The last the other areas, they have managed to successfully energize and reach 99% or 95% electrification. So our proposition is also to balance opening up these last mile areas for electrification and defining how the electric cooperatives can really be part of that last mile electrification. Kasi sir, meron talagang linya dun eh. So, and in underserved and unserved, no? So that is the balance that we will have to.
Do you have an answer right now on that?
Well,
definition?
basically, sir, when we had a discussion with the ARC on this, we suggested to them for the microgrid areas to expedite, kasi sabi nga nila, even the regulations, ang regulation is for malalaki. We suggested to them to create parang equivalent of a small claims court in the ERC, so that the small providers and microgrids can have a different treatment in the rule-making process and in the rate-setting process. That's one. That's more an administrative response. But in the definition, what we are suggesting is that in the last mile, which means when there is no line extension, that it be classified as microgrid areas. Clearly, i-separate na kagad yon, microgrid areas yon, because that's the last mile. In the areas where you have 24/7, I think there has to be a clearer rule on how the new provider and the electric cooperative can work together. A joint venture is something that we can explore, because in the present bill, it talks about transferring the asset to the franchise owner of that area. Perhaps it is something better that from the beginning they're there, so that maybe a minority, so that then we allow the private sector creativity and competitiveness to really be unleashed and electrify that area, and maybe in the 10th year, slowly get them into the, because right now, even in our present distribution utility, we're required to allocate shares to another owner. So this can be one structuring that can happen. What we're saying here is that the business model for this microgrid has to be really thought through. Our suggestion is to think about a JV towards the end of the contract period, so that, tama ho yung sinabi, sir, ng power source. Yung growth ng population, you need to upgrade your system to respond to the mandate that was given to you as a QTP. Pero pag nag-i-invest ka ulit ng additional capital, hindi mo na mababawi yon, as the bill currently provides, no? So yung contractual obligation at saka yung termination on the 15th year, yun sir yung balance that, so our proposition is to think about a JV, to allow a JV arrangement. If this is going to be a provision, in the bill, I think there has to be a JV provision, so there is a transfer. But also, there has to be another provision that if the system, kasi I'm not a believer of monopolies, so if the system, if it is transferred to the EC, there has to be also strict parameters, so that another microgrid provider can innovate. Yun yung sir yung balance eh. So
I'm also toying with the idea na wala ng transfer. If they are providing a better service, why the transfer?
Sir, but that means they will have a monopoly on that area.
Well,
The
if
one
you
who-
transfer, it's also another. You're transferring from one monopoly
To
the
another
other.
monopoly. That I think, sir, is what we have to grapple with. How to maintain these new areas open to innovation and competitiveness. I think that's the balance that I think this bill can help shape in the future, because we're planning for something that is going to be here for the 20 years. And so if we disregard altogether the distribution utility or the electric cooperative, then the stability of that area may be, something that we will need to address at a future date. So to us, sir, that is something that will need to be addressed. Kaya sa amin, sir, ang tingin namin, JV may be the answer, but that is one business model that I think we will need to look at. In terms of microgrid, sir, there is something na the solar group is very well invested here because it was really the solar technology that helped energize remote areas through the solar home systems. And the microgrid is a very important piece of initiative because sabi nga nung ating mga nasa microgrid, kapag solar home systems kasi, sir, ilaw lang. But in a microgrid, you allow enterprises to grow, and therefore, as the economic position of the residents and the community increases, so will their electricity consumption increase as well. So, therefore, yung position natin sa new microgrid service provider is to continuously capitalize in order for them to be able to serve. So, the integration of solar into that, sir, kanina may nagtatanong pa paano yung land. I think sinolbahan na yan ng solar because we now have a floating solar. In fact, the National Power Corporation had a dialogue with the industry to try and model floating solar so that it can be accessed by the diesel, close to the diesel power plant, no? Kasi, sir, there are already, as you very well know, there are already 5 test beds on the lake and in the dams. So it is already proving to be a viable technology for solar, especially if we are 7,100 islands. So hindi mo kailangang maghanap ng land, which is really a problem in islands. That's why that is certainly a solution, no? So, sir, those are some of the things that we would like to elaborate on. The microgrid definition, maybe there should be more details in that. The role of the EC, the contract, that kasi, sir, ang nakalagay doon, pag nagkaroon ng line extension ang electric cooperative, ita-turn over mo na eh. How do you handle that? Kasi a line extension is a good innovation into the maybe that is a trigger point where it can be a JV, especially if the contract period is still alive, no? But maybe that is the point where, so that it doesn't also prevent the electric cooperative to forget about their mandate to serve their franchise area. So it allows them to compete with the microgrid operator, but at the same time protect the microgrid operator in its contract period. Parang it has to be a give and take in a sense. So the third is that the storage is already very, the prices of the storage technologies are also coming down. So I think I was just addressing it to the NPC when they were saying storage is expensive. It is expensive if you still compare it with coal, but it is not expensive if you put it side by side with diesel. So it's not, so solar and storage, battery, lithium, and other storage technologies are already available. So basically, those are the items that we have that we want to stress, and we reiterate our support to the committee that we're willing to work with you on this. In fact, we have a consultant that's doing documentation of the microgrids so that we can simulate tariffs and the impact, which we can provide to the committee for their reference. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Tetchi. Thank you for also sending us a comprehensive position paper, and we would really love to hear your thoughts, especially detailed suggestion on how to refine the bill. It's also important thinking ahead, no, on how to operationalize the bill. We don't want to come up with a bill that we cannot use, no, because it's complicated and difficult. So we want to hear on the ground experience and experiences on how to roll out this type of technologies in our countryside. Next is Attorney Jay.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. On behalf of DREAM, we wish to express our support to the bill. We just want to highlight a few items for consideration. In Section 16, Mr. Chair, on the repealing clause, just to be sure, we request that you add the words legislative or administrative franchises in the listing of those that are deemed repealed or modified accordingly, so that there is no confusion. At the same time, in Section 6 and Section 7, we suggest, Mr. Chair, that the boundary between ERC and DOE is defined clearly so we don't end up in the Supreme Court. We also suggest, Mr. Chair, that in Section 14 on the amendatory clause, that Section 59 of EPIRA be included in those that are deemed amended because of the provisions in this bill. We just want to address, Mr. Chair, the earlier question raised by two senators on the supposed legal gap between this bill and the Solar Para sa Bayan law. We reviewed the Solar Para sa Bayan law, and it is clear there, Mr. Chair, Section 13, which is aptly called or entitled Competition in Remote and Unviable, Unserved, and Underserved Areas. In Section 13, Mr. Chair, it is defined clearly of the Solar Para sa Bayan law, if I may read it. It states, this franchise shall not affect the duty of the DOE to promote private sector participation in the electrification of remote and unviable, unserved, and underserved areas. Other qualified third parties shall be able to continue to participate in any competitive selection to operate in any remote and unviable, unserved, and underserved areas as determined by the DOE in accordance with Section 1 and 2 of this Act, even without a similar franchise from Congress. So as far as we are concerned, there is no priority given to Solar Para sa Bayan. If you look at Section 2 of that law, while it enumerated list of areas where it can serve, Section 13, however, ensures that there is fair competition. So that law, in our mind, does not give Solar Para sa Bayan an advantage. Otherwise, it would be deemed unconstitutional in our view. At the same time, Section 21 of the Solar Para sa Bayan law, entitled Operationalization. Again, it clearly mandates the DOE to consult with the ERC and stakeholders in promulgating the rules and regulations to implement the franchise with the following factors: without compromising grid stability, the rate effect on consumers, the continued viability and sustainability of the grantee's operations, and other technical and financial considerations as determined by the DOE and ERC within the framework provided in RA 9136, which is the EPIRA law. Section 2E of the EPIRA law is clear. It must ensure fair and non-discriminatory treatment of public and private sector entities in the process of restructuring the electric power industry. So again, to address the questions earlier raised on the gap, we don't see any gap because it is clear, despite that franchise being granted, everyone is fair and equal in the eyes of law, particularly in the eyes of this microgrid bill. So we support it, subject, of course, to the parameters on those items raised by Techi. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Jay. And actually, I would like to, I was going to flag Dr. Marsigan, and I also welcome that Yusek Fantabella is here. I do recall that we inserted competition provisions as well as extensive consultation with stakeholders and other relevant agency on the operationalization of the bill, no? Because during the hearing, it was not very clear to us how to operationalize this, no? So we gave, or we will give the DOE a lot of leeway in terms of coming up with an IRR, specifically on operationalizing this bill, take into consideration grid stability and other factors, no? Because we do recognize that, sabi nga kanina, Tetch, yung underserved is a very complicated matter. The unserved, walang problema yun, walang kuryente yun eh. The underserved, may kuryente siya, tsaka may poste. How do you carve out? No? So that is a tricky process, no? But we will leave that to the DOE, to the wisdom of DOE, how to put that together without, of course, sacrificing consumer satisfaction and maintaining grid stability and other factors, no? Director, you want to share anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify the availability of lines with less than 24/7 operation. And I wish to clarify, to validate this with NPC SPAG. Most of this availability, most of these lines that are available, but with less than 24/7 operations, are actually in off-grid areas. Because in on-grid areas, as long as the lines are already provided and connected to the grid, then the electricity is available 24/7. So in areas where there are lines provided by the distribution utilities, and yet the services are 24/7, it's a question of availability of source, and it's not availability of the lines. So this happens most of the time, if not at all, in off-grid areas, but not necessarily in on-grid areas, because on-grid areas are connected directly to the main lines. Thank you.
We'll go back to that, Director. No? I still have a lot of questions regarding some of the items in the bill, but we'll finish with some other resource person. Reggie Casas of... are you representing MAP ngayon, Reggie?
Yes. Thank you so much, Senator Win. We would like to first and foremost express our deep admiration for your effort in promoting RE. I represent the Confederation of Solar Developers of the Philippines, and today I also represent the Management Association of the Philippines. But to give a backdrop on why I'm here and why we're interested is I'd like to give you a backdrop on Confederation of Solar Developers Philippines. We're 14 private investors, and we're focused on building solar plant at utility scale. All our members have invested billions to build solar plants on the basis of profiling provinces relative to their ethnic profile, religion, and crime rate. And so we decided to invest billions into these specific provinces. The reason why I'm here is because I'd like to espouse to all CSDP members to look into expanding their presence in the areas where they are. And it's not only part of corporate social responsibilities, but looking at the implementing rules of the law. Maybe, Senator, we can look into classifying these investors as MSPs or QTPs. Is that possible, Senator, that these investors, the 14 investors who built solar plants, can be qualified easily as an MSP or a QTP? Because they do have the funds, they do have the expertise, they built lines, and they're in areas where there are technically unserved and underserved, and they can easily expand given these incentives. On the other condition that we get tied up and protected by the implementing rules of ease of doing business, as well as the ARTA. Given all of these, I'm here to push all CSDP members into supporting the microgrid as the next migration step in expanding in the areas where they are. And so these are the big investors in the solar industry, and it doesn't make sense if they're just limited to where they are. Looking at all of this, they can easily expand. They have the funds, they have the expertise, they have the manpower. They built lines, you know, and invested on transmission lines as well. And I'm referring to projects under the PSAs or merchant types, both. So that's where I am now. Thank you.
Thank you, Reggie. Well, as far as the bill is concerned, there are no restrictions for utility-scale solar providers to come in. In fact, you do have access to capital and, more importantly, access to technology.
Yes.
If you can bring in cheap batteries, then you don't need to put up diesel-fired power plants. No?
Correct. Within our group, we really have taken the position that the battery with the solar is the next tidal wave. We are investing into it.
I went to Batanes last Saturday, and grabe in alon dun.
Yes.
So if we can use tidal technology, which actually some people have been coming to me and presenting, of course the technology is still expensive, but the technology is there. Importante, it's there ready. No? Maybe not on a commercial basis yet, but I do believe that technology one day the prices will go down. No? Again, if you can use those type of technology to power our remote communities such as Batanes. No, tatlo kasi yung island ng Batanes, all in rough waters. No? So if you can use those type of technologies and then have one MSP to distribute all of those, then
Yes.
That will be a good case. No?
So if we can easily become an MSP or a QTP, provided also that there's clarity on the implementation of ease of doing business for microgrids, we can entice more investments into the country.
Okay. Thank you, Reggie. We're also joined by Mr. Atem Ramsudar Singh, Director of W Energy, I believe another QTP operator. Sir, you sent us a very extensive position paper. Thank you very much for that. It was very informative. I would like you to articulate some of the points, especially the most important points that you want the committee to take into account. And we also have some resource persons here that can interact with you, no, regarding your comments. So,
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting us to be here at this platform. I would like to project a few slides. Can we have? Yeah. As we speak today, on the 20th of August, the Sabang Renewable Energy Project is going to be energized. The plant is going to energize the distribution network, which is around 14, 15 kilometers. Our team, full strength team, is on the ground to make sure the electrons can flow from this power plant into the homes and into the businesses. It's happening today, but today is also, it's not the inauguration day. It will be a month from now, and I invite you all to come here. Now, next sheet. Next one. We'll go back to this one later. Now, the history of this project, and as a foreign investor with a 40% stake together with our partners, Gigawatt Power and Vivant Corporation, We Energy Global undertook this project, and it started in July 2012. And the project will be commissioned hopefully in September 2019. So I hope you can calculate how many years and months it took to do that. And we are still not done. So if we are talking here about now, first of all, a compliment to DOE and ERC and NPC and everybody who is involved in this game. Philippines has the best written policy in ASEAN, and I would say in the whole of Asia. I once advised the Minister of Indonesia, the Minister of Energy, to send him by DHL a full copy of your policy. and ask him to copy-paste that, replace Philippines with Republic of Indonesia. Because your policy is really good. And I say that also as a former World Banker, and as an investor, and as an engineer. Now, where do you need to really match the urgency of off-grid electrification with these beautiful written policies and people inside those organizations who do their utmost, selflessly, their best to get these permits and these licenses processed? But it's not enough. If you see how long it took to develop one little project in a little place in Palawan, as a human being, I say it's a shame. To those people who I have faced for the last 7 years, in their eyes, the women, the single mom running their t-shirt shop at the tourist spot, Manila doesn't know what these people want and what their urgencies, their dreams, and their ambitions are. I hope that with that spirit of urgency and the bill that the senator has proposed, that bill leads to an acceleration. In 2015, we have comprehensively, and you can see that in the comments we wrote to the committee, we have proposed to DOE, after a public hearing of DOE, how to simplify the entire process of a QTP. This bill, 175, is really coming with points that are touching the critical items of speeding up the process. Not creating new franchise and that kind of things. What is essential, private sector has technology and money. Our company, our investors are not looking for 100 megawatts to power middle class, rich people in cities with clean energy. Our company has mobilized crowdfunders from Germany, Netherlands, all people friends of the Philippines and of Southeast Asia. Moms and dads who are willing to put €1,000 to €2,000 to invest in microgrids. Why? Because it serves the community who have dreams and ambitions and entrepreneurship. This schedule shows how reality looks like compared to readiness of people. Even today, as we speak, and as Sabang is being energized, 560 households are not wired. How can we connect those people? We send a letter to DOE, Mr. Mario. We've said, do you have, I don't know, about 3 million peso to get these people wired? Because we are not allowed in the budget of SREC, and then ERC won't approve that, or NAPUCOR will take it down, that we are not allowed to wire those people. Now, if we can't wire those people, they are not in compliance with the local municipal building permits, and we are not allowed to electrify those people. Now, it's a shame that we talk about policies, and we can't help those 560 households to be wired. Now, we have deployed the technology. Now, can you do something back for those communities out there? Find something. Don't tell me the money is not there. You want private sector to do that? Yes, let's strike a deal. We can do that. So there are a lot of other points here in electrification where we need to address, and I hope in the bill we could add those things in terms of readiness of households. This
Sir,
bill,
before I'll cut you off. No, how come you cannot use that? Just put the wires.
No, the thing is,
You're a QTP operator, correct?
yes, but inside the house, the switches and the sockets is not part of our sort of mandate. It is the mandate of the private, the consumer, to obtain a license from the municipality before we are able to connect them.
Then why don't you just offer it as part of your service?
Sorry?
Offer it as part of your service.
We
Be
offer-
the electrical contractor.
It is not as per ERC regulations and approval and the order that approve the rates for us to raise. This item is not included, and it's not even allowed to be included.
If it's included, you can do it.
If the regulation would allow us to include that,
So-
of course we would have done
So
it.
what's missing now is the wiring inside the house.
Correct, sir.
So if there's no wiring inside the house, how can they use your electricity?
They can't use it.
So, so why put all of this if they cannot use your electricity?
No, what I'm saying is that there are other commercial entities and other households who have done that. But there are still 500 on the bottom of the pyramid that have a house but are not able to do that. So there are it's a segment, not all the service area that is not able to do that. Now, can I go back to the previous slide? As an answer to your question, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chair? Yes. But in your area, how many people have that problem?
it's only the households in the lower income groups, about 560 people, let's say households, not people, households that have not been able to bring together that income, that 200 something, let's say about 6,000 peso per household, to get their house wired and get the permit from the municipality. The municipality is willing to accelerate that approval process, but the physical wiring and the sockets and the switches must be in the house. Everything outside the house, we will connect.
More or less, how much would it come out for each household?
It's about 6,000 peso roughly to have, let's say, 3 lights, the wiring, and let's say 3 sockets, I think, that they need to have in their house to run it, and that will be installed by local installers.
Mr. Chair, wala ho ba tayong government agency that can provide assistance? Baka DOE?
Sir, I think one of the issue is that it's my understanding that they will, if they put the money there, they will not be able to recover it because the regulations will not allow them to recover the 6,000. So it's a dead investment on the part of the MSP, on the microgrid service provider, because they will not be able to, ERC does not allow them to recover the 6,000. Now, it's also my understanding that NEA has a kitty that gives meters and service wiring for free. But since they have waived the areas, then they are not duty bound to give that for free. So they're really in twilight zone. This is why we're saying that these are the things that you need an interface with.
But Mr. Atin, how many households are in your area, in your QTP area?
The total is around 800, including commercial entities. And when I say commercial entities, I mean a small shop. Right, I mean a small shop. And those are the bigger consumers, you know, like the shops, the small restaurants, or the restaurant next to the house. Those are, we consider that to be commercial entities because that's the way ERC has approved the rates out there. But the 560 households, real households, families living in a small house, that are on legal land and that will be eligible for approval by the city government or the barangay government, they don't have that funding right now. Of course, we have tried to prepare them for many months and even a year ago, even through the churches and so on, to save their money and so on. But it is a problem for those families.
And before you continue, a short comment from Mr. Hilario.
Just to clarify lang po, actually po, well, I share this with other industry players. Actually po, there is a facility. Case in point po is our Malapascua site. The National Electrification and NEA actually has an ongoing program, yung pong rapid electrification. What the electric cooperative, even if it's a wave area po, what the electric cooperative simply has to do is to nominate the X number of households that would qualify for the missionary or lifeline. It's what is provided po is the meter, the service wire drop, and as I recall, a minimum of 2 light bulbs, yung pong very basic kit. And what happens po is, for example, if it's in my waved area, I change a different role. If they have the materials, and since I have sunk personnel, I mean, I have linemen there, we actually just install it for them So the materials are provided by NEAPO, and this is not a new program po. It has been going on. We were able to avail of this. Remember when Malapasco was also damaged by typhoon, and the electric cooperatives had to help out. And then second po is on the other aspect naman po, not all municipalities po, if you are to serve them power, normally we would require that there's a certificate of electrical inspection by the So in some municipalities po, not all municipalities have a licensed electrician. But what some LGUs have done po, they've actually deputized some barangays or LGUs so that they can, in remote areas po, if it's an island barangay, the municipalities in the mainland, it's impossible for the electrician to travel. So what they do, they would deputize. Kami naman po, what we do is we can help train, but to maintain the bound, it would be abnormal if we would be the one inspecting and installing. So yun lang po, we provide the training. We train them, and there's existing program po for in different provinces, they have po yung mga test the training so that they can have it installed.
Director, you want to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, the issue comprises of two things. No? One is the cost of having the installation, the household installation, and the other one is the inspection and permit. And as presented by Power Source, there are avenues to get the materials and do the inspection. Now, on the bigger picture, actually, not only happening in these QTP areas, as well as in our total electrification initiatives, the problem is really on the inspection and electrical permit, because some of the local government units would not waive the fees. And these fees sometimes are add-on concerns for the household. So what we have been doing is we are coordinating with the DOE, is coordinating with the ILG to have a resolution that would allow the waiver for the fees for the electrical inspection and electrical permit. The other thing is the lack of electricians in the municipality or the access to the areas. Deputization by LGU, as presented by Power Source, is an avenue for that. So it's really the fees for the electrical permit and electrical inspection that remains to be unsolved. Thank you.
But I think, Director, look at this issue carefully, and I think we can tap other funding of government. I know we have the NAIHE program, no, that we can use to somehow bridge the gap. Because sayang naman, the power plant is already there, the wires are already there. It's only the components inside the house is missing, no? So ako nasasayangan ako because it's already, everything is already there except for that component, last component. So I think we can come up with a program to help the household at least subsidize or help the proponent give them the necessary materials to link into the system.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I have earlier mentioned, as far as the cost of the household installation, that means the balance of system for the house, there are avenues. Either we tap the NEA resources, which are as presented by Power Source. But the other difficulties is the permit and licenses. We have solution for the cost. But for the LGU's permits and inspection, we need to coordinate with the ILG to make an issuance directing all LGUs that for electrification purposes, then the LGUs should waive the fees.
Okay.
And for the lack of inspectors, then LGUs can deputize.
Okay. We'll talk about that now because that's going into local government territory, but we'll talk about that later on. Mr. Atin?
Yeah, in the case of Sabang, that is not a problem. The problem is really at the household level. So any help that you may have would be fantastic and great to set the example while indeed looking into at policy level. To address a question, Mr. Chairman, that you raised and asked NREB to look into simulations, we have done extensive simulations, not only in a spreadsheet, but also in labs on microgrids in Singapore. and we've looked into the cost difference, and based on this data, DOE and GIC, the German Foreign Development Agency, have developed a paper on hybrid systems using renewable energy and diesel. What we have done is, based on the request of several secretaries of DOE over the last 7 years, we've developed this simulation to show clearly the difference between a full traditional diesel, as being done right now in many places in the Philippines and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, versus a hybrid, adding solar panels plus batteries. Now, battery isn't expensive. My father always told me, don't say something is expensive. Speak in terms of cost and benefits, right? It's not about being expensive. Now, if you look into this picture, and this is based on 20-year historical data of price of fuel, the inflation rate, we have looked into the currency impact even of dollar components, a comprehensive model that is based on International Monetary Fund's scenarios of what they think will be the price of oil in the future. And we looked into the Sabang project with very clear mathematical rules of how the technology behaves. And what we do in a certain scenario, we can see that there is a very clear saving for the government on subsidy. In the minimum scenario, that the price of oil was at the level as of about 1 year ago, at a $40 level per barrel, and there is a clear correlation with the diesel price in Philippines. The savings for the Missionary Electrification Fund would be $3.7 million US, or about 200 million peso in 20 years. Now, if the price goes up, which is already at today's level of around 50, 55, 60, and it goes towards 80, forget 100, but it goes towards 80, you may be able to save 570 million peso in 20 years. Now imagine how many other sites you can electrify with that subsidy. So the point we are trying to make here is, don't scrap that subsidy, don't increase it, but redistribute your savings and the budgets that are being approved by the Senate, redistribute it based on these maths out there. You don't need to be a professor to understand this, but it is complicated stuff when you correlate the price of diesel in Philippines to what we think is going to be in the future in the Middle East, or whatever factors that are determining. And we are using for that the IMF models to plug it into the models in Philippines or in Myanmar or in Indonesia. But that's an answer. If the details are desired, we can share that with your committee, sir. Now, finally, I think Bill number 175 has as a winner in it to really encourage ERC to reduce the time to, can I go to the next slide? Yeah? The time of about 2 years into 3 months, 90 days. And we believe it is possible to do that. And again, there are very willing and good professional individuals in ERC who really express their solidarity, and I'm pretty sure they can do this thing. And we don't want to go into it why it has not happened, but 2 years, and we understood we should be happy that it took only 2 years. There are others who are waiting longer. The second item in importance in the bill, what we believe is looking into the DOE's list and looking into the transition of electricity service from ECs to MSPs. I think that is an important part, but we would not recommend the removal of waivers. I think it was said earlier. We negotiated waivers with Paleco, for example, in Palawan. It took some time because most of the time those electric cooperatives were not ready to give away their franchise, which we understand. We also support the idea that process of negotiation with an electric cooperative, and we do that as a private sector entity because we believe that in the negotiation process, learning happens and capacity building happens. And I think it is important. I was privileged to be invited by DOE a few years back to move along and meet with all the other electric cooperatives to share with them how electric cooperatives can collaborate with private sector on QTPs. And you will see that a lot of these institutions or electric cooperatives don't know. So our recommendation is it's good to address that transition. It's good to get the electric cooperatives to be part of the game, including defining what happens at the end of the contract. With PHILRECA, we have developed a very comprehensive, almost 30-page agreement on the points and the criteria and the terms of conditions where they could come in. But don't remove the waiver, but let it, I think the strength of the bill is, say, it has to be done in 3 months' time and not longer. PHILRECA thing took almost a year to negotiate that. So with that, I would say, Mr. Chairman, the bill is really supporting the idea of cutting down unnecessary bureaucracy and speeding up the time and showing real solidarity with those people who are not electrified yet. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you go back to the slide, yung may solar? One more. One more. So this is, Mr. Atin, is a real picture, an actual picture of your plant in Sabang.
Yes, sir.
And this is a, what's the capacity?
What you see there, sir, is 1.4 megawatt solar. In the buildings out there, there will be, in the middle building, there will be 1.2 megawatt diesel. And adjacent to that, there will be, just 1 second, here in this building, in this area, we have 2.4 megawatt hours of Tesla batteries, lithium-ion batteries that are low cost. You don't need to put them into an air-conditioned room. They can be outdoor. They can be basically in the rain. They are robust, and they can run 24/7. So we have a control room where the algorithms are designed by us and executed by Tesla to make sure that the priority is given to solar to be going into the grid, and only switch on the diesel when diesel is needed at night or when the battery is fully empty. Then we use diesel. With this algorithm, we were able to ensure that in the first 5-6 years, the solar component in the grid would be 60%, 62%, and diesel would only be 38%, and that gives you the subsidy savings, right? Then going forward, when demand grows, we believe that if we keep using diesel, given the growing demand and the space we don't have to expand too much of solar, we can expand on the roofs of the buildings and some on this land at the other side of the river. We will be able to maintain a 55-45 or 50-50 level, depends on how the demand will grow in the area. Now that is fairly unique in the sense of the solar in the mix. Now we bought diesel generators of Caterpillar because they are one of the few machines that would enable us in future, if the price of biodiesel would be competitive to the common diesel, we would be able to pump in biodiesel into those generators and make it a full 100% renewable energy. To say for future QTPs that we are developing in Palawan, we just last month sent an expedition to measure tidal potential. We have done almost 50 points of measurements along certain islands in the Coron and Busuanga area, and it was a bit disappointing because we did measurements all the way to 30 meters deep and tried to find currents. Now, what currents were we looking for? Globally, these days, there are only 3 almost commercially available tidal turbines. One is from France, one is from Scotland, and one is from the Netherlands. So we looked into these 3 machines, and where could we put these machines to get rid of that diesel? Because then you have a lot of more subsidy savings out there. Now, it was disappointing because the commercial available tidal turbines currently in the world, need a speed, a current of around 2 meters per second. Now, when we did the measurement, the highest speed we found in that northern part of Palawan, we found around half a meter to 0.8 meter per second. I was so disappointed because we thought we would be able to find that somewhere close to 2 meters per second, and then our company would be willing to deploy the first tidal for a QTP. But unfortunately now, the rule of thumb, based on this research, the report is going to be available in October, and we would be happy to share that with everybody. The rule of thumb would be ask the village people and the fishing community whether their tides are fluctuating more than, let's say, if it is around 1 or 2 meters, and you can see that on the shores. Visually, you don't need expensive expeditions that we undertook into the area. Then the potential for tidal in around that island might be probably not very low. So that is a bit of challenge. There are corridors, just like wind, in Philippines where it might be possible, but we would need to search for higher tidal differences in those 24 hours to see where the tidal differences of 4, 5, 6 meters are found, because then the potential for deploying the current available technologies might be possible.
How much is the total investment for this Sabang project?
This project is around 400 million peso.
400. This includes the distribution lines.
The 15 kilometers of distribution line, yes, sir.
Okay. And how much are you charging the consumers?
The ERC approved rates are for residential are 12 peso per kilowatt hour, and for commercial entities is 15 peso per kilowatt hour.
Expensive, huh?
Well, people were pretty happy when we had a public hearing after the ERC order.
This is retail rate already, 12 and 15?
Yeah. We will be billing them straight, and this was approved by the ERC. We feel that people in those areas are very happy to get 24/7. It's an assurance that they can build on their productivity schedules, their productivity ambitions, and their willingness to pay, even ability to pay, is amazing, enthusiastic.
You don't get any subsidies?
Yeah, we have applied for the subsidy, and we are getting a subsidy, and the subsidy is based on a 23.
Consumers are not getting any subsidies?
No, the price of 12 and 15 are subsidized SARRs.
It's already subsidized?
It's already subsidized price.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll go to that later on, no? But thank you for sharing that with us. These are the models that we want to see, and just goes to show that this type of technology can be implemented in the Philippines, provided that we cut down red tape. Earlier, I saw that you started in 2012, and then you just executed this project in 2018. I believe in 2012, your hair was not as white yet, no? But now it's.
Well, no, I was getting gray at the age of 30.
But thank you for sharing this with us. We'll discuss. I have some questions, but we'll throw it later on. Thank you, Mr. Tip. We'll go to this side of the room, and we have some people from PHILRECA. Attorney Janine, any comments?
Yes. Good morning to everyone. Mr. Chair, in behalf of PHILRECA, with its 121 electric cooperative members, we commend the committee for Senate Bill 175, or the Microgrid Systems Act, which aims to accelerate the government's total electrification effort by institutionalizing the entry of microgrid system in the electrification arena. Insofar as our intention of total electrification is concerned, our association is in full support thereof. But we should always bear in mind that total electrification should also come with affordable cost of electricity. And of course, however, pending our more detailed discussion on the proposed legislative measure, we would like to express our reservation on the following features of the bill. First of all, on removing the required waivers from franchise distribution utilities for the microgrid service providers, may we appeal that the distribution utilities or the franchise areas be at least be given the right of first refusal before it will be given up to the private sector for the microgrid system. This is on the reason that the possibility that such areas might possibly be included already in the ESIS distribution development plan or might have been covered already by an existing currently being negotiated with the power supply agreements. And also, we would like also to appeal that electric cooperatives are already venturing into microgrid system be already accredited as MSP. One of which is the Romelco, which is already in microgrid system business since 2007. The first solar diesel battery hybrid system, but sad to say, the story of Romelco, they were not able to provide with the subsidy cost because the consumers should pay the high cost and very expensive electricity and a portion of the true cost of generation rate due to lack of the government support. So we also pray that all isolated or remote areas should be treated equally in terms of benefits when it comes to UCME subsidy, since they are not connected to the grid or the main grid. Currently, only those remote areas or isolated grid with NPC SPAG or taken over by NPP or QTP operations who are being provided with subsidy. So we pray that the electric cooperatives be also given the equal opportunity when it comes to the support of the government through the subsidies. And of course, on the accreditation mechanism for MSPs, we pray that a representation from the distribution utility be considered to give due consideration to the first-hand experience in the performance of some currently operating MSPs. Undeniably, distribution utilities have direct knowledge on an MSP's performance, should it be good barometer, or whether they should be accredited or not. And of course, our third comment on the possibility of transitioning electricity service from DUs to awarded MSPs in underserved areas. Any transition of a service that would involve takeover or the use of distribution utilities, existing facilities should be properly compensated. We pray that a mechanism also be included in the bill. And another is on Section 8, the generation companies, DUs, retail electricity suppliers and their respective subsidiaries or affiliates may engage in the business of MSPs in unserved and underserved areas. As in the case of RA 10531, ECs are vested with powers necessary or convenient for the accomplishment of its corporate purpose, one of which is to construct, acquire, own, and operate, maintain generating facilities within its franchise areas. However, in the same manner that the franchise DUs are given preference in the case of opposing bids or when competitive selection process results to a tie, we suggest that this similar feature be included in Senate Bill 175. In any event where an electric cooperative makes a bid or competes with MSP, the ECs be given a qualified bid or be given preference over the entry of a private MSP. And for the Section 9, effect of grid extension, the DU shall have the option to acquire the distribution system of the MSP upon expiration of the MSP contract, and the ERC's approval should only be limited to the tariff implication to such acquisition, and that actually the approval of ERC on the transfer of the said facility to the electric cooperative. And of course, on the involvement of the NEA, being the regulatory agency covering the electric cooperatives, we pray that they also be involved in the handling of the CSP procedure. And of course, we also pray that the electric cooperatives and the ERC be possibly participate in the CSP proceedings, Mr. Chair. And of course, we thank the PASEA for raising up the concern of the electric cooperatives that the electric cooperatives are really open for joint venture or partnership when it comes to the electrification of the underserved and unserved areas. And we hope that it will be considered by the chairman, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Attorney. Attorney, I understand from you that you want the electric cooperatives to have a chance to participate in the CSP or to conduct the CSP? In the conduct of the CSP. So you want them to conduct the CSP.
Be part of the conduct. I believe because in the bill it is the
DOE,
DOE who
correct.
will conduct the CSP.
Okay.
And for at least for NEA and the electric cooperatives and ERC to be part of the conduct of the CSP.
And then you also, if I understand it correct, you also said that the ECs be allowed to create their own MSPs?
That they be accredited as MSPs, especially for those electric cooperatives who are already venturing into microgrid systems.
These are ECs outside of their franchise areas.
It is within the franchise areas and maybe with outside their franchise area.
Kasi if it's within, then dapat wala silang underserved at unserved.
Mr. Chair, because you see the rates
Kasi
of
I
the-
would assume that if you want to be an MSP, then dapat matagal mo nang ginawa yun even without this bill. Therefore, you should not have any unserved or underserved areas. Correct?
The reason why we would want electric cooperatives to be accredited as MSP is because so that they will also be able to avail of the UCME or the benefits given to the microgrid operators.
Outside of their franchise area.
Within the franchise and outside, sir.
Within and outside of their franchise area. I would assume also that comment is geared towards ECs who have experience in microgrid systems and they want to participate outside of their franchise area.
So as it is right now, Mr. Chair, like in the case of Romelco, they have microgrid system but they have a separate rate for areas being served by microgrid. Mas mataas po yung rate doon as compared to the areas that is being served mainly by the electric cooperative through its own distribution system po. Because the cost of maintaining a microgrid system is really high, which is being explained by our one of our resource persons.
Okay, but going back, no, I was saying, if the ECs will be allowed to participate or to create their own MSPs, microgrid service provider, then that should be geared towards outside of their franchise area. Kasi kung within your franchise area, meron ka pang underserved and unserved, dapat sinaserve mo na siya. There's no logic for you to participate outside kung within your franchise area, meron ka pang...
Sir, kasi if you can participate, if you can provide the same service which is being offered by a private company, magkakaiba kasi yung rate nun, sir eh. Say if it is being served by microgrid system provider, the rate of the provider might be higher than the rate which is being offered now by the electric cooperative. But if the electric cooperative will be given the opportunity to have its own microgrid system and be a microgrid system provider who can provide same service as being provided by private at a higher cost, then the electric cooperative would be willing to do it.
Is there a prohibition right now for ECs to create their own microgrid system?
I believe there is a lot of requirements being required from the electric cooperatives and they have to apply for a rate in ERC.
Okay lang, but there's no prohibition. Marami lang requirements.
Yes, sir.
But there's no prohibition. They can be an MSP right now if they want
But
to.
they are not accredited.
There's no wala naman accreditation process right now eh. There's no such thing right now. They can actually they can actually use this technology right now
Sir, ang
if they
downside
want
kasi
to.
is they might be penalized by the regulatory agencies like ERC because the rates are not really approved by ERC.
Hindi, syempre mag-a-apply ka sa ERC, no? You don't just you just become a microgrid. You still have to go through the process. My point is walang legal prohibition. Correct?
I'm not sure if it is allowed by DOE. Similar to the case where an electric cooperative would like to venture in renewable energy na wala siyang service contract.
Let's go with microgrid muna, no? Kasi that's what the point here. My point is, ang ECs, they can be an MSP right now if they want to. No, you
Yes,
just
sir.
have to go through the process,
Yes,
go
sir.
through getting the rates, that. You don't need this bill actually,
Yes, sir.
correct?
But the reason why we wanted to be accredited or be allowed is for us to avail of the benefits being given to an MSP, like the subsidy rates through UCME.
But you're now enjoying subsidies rin naman right now.
No, sir.
Sa mga off-grid?
Sa mga microgrid na say for example, yung sa specific case is the Romelco case, they are not being given a subsidy. So the consumers enjoy the service of electricity but at a higher cost.
Subsidies in the RE law. Which subsidies in what form?
Subsidies through UCME.
Through UCME.
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I just have to clarify something about that UCME. The DOE already came up with a policy for omnibus missionary electrification. It already revoked or repealed DC 2004 na walang UCME for sa mga private providers.
Be repealing that. Okay. So in other words, what's the effective policy right now?
If I may, the next step for the omnibus guidelines is to do the rationalization of the UCME, to determine which areas and whose households should be the beneficiaries of the UCME. This is relevant to the concern that in off-grid areas, even the, let's say, the smallest consumers actually provide for the UCME, for the big consumers in off-grid areas. So this is one of the process that we are now undertaking to rationalize, determine who are the deserving beneficiaries for UCME. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Janine, submit to us your position paper in detail, and we'll study it very carefully. Yes, thank you. We also have people from NGCP. Any comments? May comments po kayo?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Honorable Chair and Vice Chair. For NGCP, currently we're doing our research and study on the impact of these microgrid systems to the main grid, particularly the grid-connected or the grid-tied microgrid systems in terms of real-time supply and demand balance. And we will submit our position paper later.
Thank you. Transco, any comments?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. We have a few comments. For example, in Section 5, to address the concern of one of our resource speaker, we suggest that we provide that the microgrid system, that the development of the microgrid system shall be with coordination with the distribution development plan, and that the total capacity of the grid tied microgrid system shall be within the DU's annual penetration limit. Then we also suggest that we give a preference to the parties that will utilize the hybrid energy system in providing electricity to the remote areas, which is consistent with the RA 9136, otherwise known as the IPIRA. Transco also suggests that there must be an incentive that the bill will be provide for MSP that will utilize a hybrid energy system. We will submit our full comment on this bill, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. PSAM, any comment? Wala bang PSAM? PEMC?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and to the Madam Vice Chairman of this committee. PEMC generally support this bill 175, and we would like to suggest some enhancements as regards the implementation of this bill. For the first one, we would like in section 9, the effect of grid extension. I think this was tackled also previously, that there would be arrangement with regard to the full recovery of the capex expended by the MSP when there would be a grid expansion that would be happening. Also, on the section 7, wherein the DOE is mandated to publish on an annual basis the list of underserved and unserved areas. We just need to, we recommend that also the DOE indicate the target date of grid extension so that there would be consideration with the investor as regards the recovery of its expenditures if it really intended to invest in a particular area. And also on the definition of the microgrid, also we recommend that the committee consider limiting the implementation of the microgrid policy on islanding mode, because we see some substantial costs that would be incurred as regards the extension of the DU networks if we go on with the grid-tied implementation. This include recovery of lost charges attributable to the integration of microgrid systems, as well as the impact on distribution system reliability, which include unscheduled withdrawal and injection from and to the distribution system. Lastly, we also recommend the consideration of related policies as regards embedded generation by the Department of Energy. This includes processes with regard to market participation and regulatory requirements. So with that, we pray that these suggestions be considered, and we fully support the bill.
Thank you, PMC. PCC, any comment?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning to the members of the committee. The PCC generally expresses its support for the Senate bill as it seeks to establish a new regulatory framework for microgrid systems. We recognize that the creation of a new legal regime harnessing electricity will be good for the improvement of the state of competition in the country's energy market. Notably, competition policy supports innovation and dynamism, and this leads to new and better products for consumers. Nonetheless, in order to ensure a level playing field for all firms intending to operate in the market, the regulatory framework to be established should be competitively neutral. Having said that, we would like to manifest some points to be considered by the committee. First of all, we would like it to be clarified that there is no need for microgrid service providers to get a congressional franchise should they decide to engage in such a service. We note that this has been brought up in previous committee meetings, and these entities engaged in electricity generation or distribution through microgrids do not need to apply for a franchise under existing laws and regulations. Moreover, requiring MSPs to procure a legislative franchise would only serve as an additional barrier to entry. This is contrary to the objective of the measure, which is to provide immediate relief to affected consumers in these areas. Our second point would be in the conduct of the competitive selection process. We note that the MSPs that would be allowed to operate in underserved or unserved markets would depend on the competitive selection process. The PCC notes that the CSP would effectively limit the number of MSP firms that would be allowed to operate. However, considering that electricity distribution is a natural monopoly, imposing such a limitation would be acceptable from a competition standpoint. We would want it to be ensured, however, that in the conduct of the CSP, which will be developed by the Department of Energy, it should be reasonable and it should be applied equally to all firms intending to participate. Having said that, we would like, PCC would like to be part of the crafting of the CSP rules for MSPs in line with our competition advocacy function. Our third point will be for Section 8 of the Senate bill, wherein generation companies, distribution utilities, and retail electricity suppliers and their respective subsidiaries may engage in the business of MSPs. Now, the only requirement is that a separate account is maintained for such a business undertaking as being an MSP. Now, on its face, it does not seem to pose any issues from a competition perspective. However, we suggest that to act as an additional safeguard, we recommend that the transactions and dealings of such businesses undertaking as an MSP in the underserved or unserved areas would be on an arm's length basis to all possible consumers in the area to be served. The reason behind this is that they may have existing business interests in the said areas. Thus, it might give rise to vertical integration concerns. As such, to level the playing field, we suggest to impose fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory obligations on the business arrangements of the MSP provider, of the MSP. Our fourth point would be the effect of grid extension under Section 9. Distribution utilities are given the option to acquire the distribution system of the MSP. Should the grid be extended to previously unserved NTP or QTP areas upon the expiration of the MSP contract. And this should be subject to the approval of the ERC. The PCC recognizes the value of the efficiency to be gained that such a provision tries to achieve by allowing the DU to initiate a takeover of the MSP's distribution system. However, it may be possible that an existing MSP may serve the area better instead of having a DU take over its facilities. The existing MSP operating therein may prove to be more efficient or more cost-effective. As such, we recommend the conduct of a CSP which would determine which is the more efficient provider in that said area. If and when the DU emerges to be the winner as the CSP, then it may be allowed to take over the distribution facilities of the dislodged MSP. Considering that this involves an acquisition, possible competitions may emerge, and as such, we recommend that such acquisition be subjected to the relevant provisions of the Philippine Competition Act. For the last point, we would like to clarify in Section 5, where the installation of MSP facilities in underserved areas do not require a waiver from the concerned DU, but at the same time shall not revoke the DU's franchise over the said area. We would just like to have this clarified as to how it will be operationalized. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify on the generation requirement in the Bangsamoro law. Generation plants are required to get a franchise. So we just want to make sure that if that will be amended, it will be considered already in this bill, considering that the Basulta area, Basilan, Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, is a major area that we need to energize. So doon kasi sa Bangsamoro law, na-require yung prangkisa sa generation. So, baka pwedeng magamot na ng batas na to. If you will allow, I will just make certain updates from the Department of Energy. If I'm taking advantage of some of the players being present here, especially the NREB chair is here. First of all, the Secretary is very much welcoming any disruptions, disruptive thinking as far as the energy sector is concerned, considering that there are new technologies coming up. So disruptive positive is very much welcomed by the Secretary. Secondly, the Department of Energy is coming up with a QTP policy, and also is pushing for an executive order so that we can have a more comprehensive electrification program. Thirdly, what we have picked up so far in this meeting is indeed there's a definition that we have to consider on microgrid, because if we consider only a household to be energized versus the opportunity for enterprises to grow, I think that's a very important difference. So, malaking diferensya. As far as the permitting is concerned, the DOE Investment Promotion Office is right now talking to the DENR, and we are also moving towards Cluster 4 in harmonizing the permitting system within the government agencies. Because as far as the DOE is concerned, we only have 60 days to come up with a service contract plus a qualified third party na award. So dapat matapos yon. Kaya wala na, kaya in-emphasize ko po kanina, wala na yung QSSC portion ng NAPOCOR because once the DOE is given 60 days as a mother agency, kasama po si NEA Electrification, kasama si NAPOCOR, pasok po dun sa 60 days. And calendar days po yun. So it's already being answered by the EVOS law. We're implementing the same. We just also have to clarify if solar para sa bayan will be benefited by this bill also. Because baka iba yung treatment or sinasabi nga baka pareho lang. And ang importante lang is the integration into the, kasi mayroon tayong move na i-integrate yung mga SPAG areas into the grid. And I'm assuming that the microgrid areas will be integrated to a bigger system. And yun yung mga challenging points technically na sana ma-address na ng bill na mas madali siyang evolve in or mas madali siyang i-integrate technically. So, proper compensation to the DUs, especially if it is within their franchise areas, and compensation also for the microgrid provider, especially that they have already made investments. We just want to emphasize that there's indeed a need to look into the business concept of this microgrid provider so that maraming investments na pumapasok. Pero ilayo lang po sana natin yung thinking natin, reliance natin sa subsidies. Because talagang gusto natin is maging competitive siya. So, subsidies, medyo, hindi lang kasi DOE ang concern sa subsidies, pati DOF and DBM. So, yun yung mga considerations. So, just to clarify again, as far as the UCM is concerned, any new player going into the SPAG areas, wala siyang UCME subsidy. At yung may mga existing na UCME, meron tayong phasing out of the UCME that the DOE is coming out with. That's all.
Just clarify, Yusek. So yung mga unserved and then the QTP will come in, the consumers there in the unserved areas will not be qualified for subsidies. They'll pay true cost.
True cost.
So pag diesel yan, babayaran nila true cost ng diesel dun sa unserved?
Yes.
Di ba ang mahal nun? Mahal
Kaya
yun,
nga, dapat mag-isip ng ibang paraan na mas maganda yung technology.
Oh, pero I think they will be paying at least mga 25, 30 pesos per. But right now, pwede silang kumuha ng subsidies.
NAPOCOR lang.
napocor lang. But the QTP can...
Yung mga dating may kontrata.
Oh,
yes.
yung mga dati, alam ko meron.
Yes.
Like, for example, W Energy has
Yeah.
subsidies eh. So, the new ones,
No.
wala.
Kasi we have to phase out already. Hindi kasi namin nakikita madedevelop yung mga bagong technologies kung nakasalalay tayo sa subsidy. For example, mayroon ng 25, 30 pesos na binabayaran na ngayon, mayroon ng 80, may 40. Pero kung dinedevelop na si Ocean Energy, pwede na nga eh. Competitive na si Ocean, sana doon. Kasi kung binibaby parati siya, hindi talaga siya...
Well, we'll go deeper into that, no? Because if we will be technology neutral, kung ako yung developer, the best is diesel talaga. Kasi maliit ang footprint eh.
Hindi.
Maliit
Kasi yung delivery mo ng diesel sa sobrang layo, malaki masyado yung cost.
Ano lang, no? I'm just thinking out loud. Maliit ang footprint niya eh. No? So, mas madaling magtayo ng diesel. The problem is, susceptible ka naman sa price of fuel.
Tsaka sa pag-deliver mo,
delivery.
logistics.
I think when you factor the delivery, it's still
think Batanes.
True. Batanes talagang...
May 2 araw na naglalakbay sa bangka.
But the thing is, the consumers will be paying at least 25, 30 pesos per kilowatt hour. But if you have the CSP naman, and then they will drive down prices using hybrid system, baka pwede, as long as it's open and competitive.
Baka consider lahat ng factors, pati weather, pati alon.
Right. So we'll go deeper into that later on. We still have a few resource persons. So para marinig natin sila, si Mr. Narida of the REAP.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. It's almost 12 o'clock. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to showcase something. REAP is coming in just to show to you, I think, which is very relevant right now in the discussion. We have actually a short presentation, I think a 4-slide presentation.
Sir, can we go straight into the meat of your presentation?
Yes, sir. This is a 4-slide presentation because we can draw a lot of learning from this one. It's a very short one. Next slide, please. This is an island in Bantique that has a 200 household population, and it is underserved and cannot be connected to the main grid. So this is very typical of what the discussion is all about. So very relevant. Next slide, please. So it's a 50 kilowatt hybrid system, diesel, battery, and then solar. Before, they were only being served by about 4 to 6 hours. Now they are being served for 24/7. So this is actually a project which is actually that would already show to you the potential collaboration with Electric Co-op, which is Anteco Electric Cooperative, the private sector, and this one with ADB donation. And this is also a collaboration with the local government of Kulasi Antique. So they were the one who provided the land for this development. So the new feature for this one is we have a prepaid system. But anyway, I'll go to the next slide, please. Okay. So this is actually the actual. So this is fairly new. So this is very relevant because it would give a lot of insights on this discussion that we have on microgrid. So as you can see, the blue line is actually the residential consumer, and the red line is actually the commercial consumer. So you can see that the growth is actually on the commercial side. Because when Boracay was closed, this became actually an alternate for Boracay because it's a white sand area also, but a very small one. And they don't have a homestay by that time because they have only 4 hours. So now that last summer, where we had the 24/7, you could see a significant growth. So abnormally, January, we have a very low offtake, and come April, May, there's really like, that's already like about 11,000 kilowatt hour. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is actually the energy mix. So we have projected that it would be 80-20. So as you can see, the total there, there's really a significant growth from 2,000 kilowatt hour per month starting January to to almost 11,000 kilowatt hour in just a matter of 4 months. So the lesson for us here is that, to the next slide please, so we can illustrate this further. So the lesson here is that if you have a benchmark price as set by ERC, you have difficulty. It has to have a mechanism to address this variability or flexibility of the consumption, because the blue line is actually purely solar. But once there's already like a larger offtake, then diesel would kick in. So with that, you know, like if you have a benchmark, how will you address the variability of the prices? So basically, that's the lesson that we have here. So one, it could be done with DU, with an electric co-op, with the municipality, with the local government, with a funding agency, or even ADB or private sector. This price here is the true cost of generation, is net of ADB donation. So that is the true cost of generation. So if you don't have any subsidy for this, and if our aspiration is to accelerate electrification for these islands, that would be the real picture now, because that's actual pricing now. So that's why I thank you for giving me an opportunity to present this, because this is really current now and operating. So we can draw a lot of learning from this.
But sir, this you said net of ADB.
That's net of
But
ADB.
yung ADB kasi donation yun eh.
Yes, sir.
Paano kung binili mo yung solar?
That would be already at around 28 to 31, sir.
28
pesos.
28 pesos.
To-
If you have bought the panels,
Actually, the batteries po.
the batteries.
Yeah.
Ang donation nila is batteries.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
So previously, the cost of per kilowatt there for 4 hours is about 35 pesos. So now, like here, we have already like, even if we add we recognize the donation of, in the cost of ADB, that would be at around the 28 to 31 pesos. Reason for that, this is a 50 kilowatt system, a very cute system, which everybody can learn from. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, how much was the investment, Mr.
Roughly, that's around in the level of about 22, 23 million already.
53 million? And when did you start the project?
We started developing the project, I think, 2016. And we were able to put that on the ground only this 2019.
So 3 years.
Because we have to go through the process actually of CSP, of forming, this is one thing that we also learned from this. We formed a joint venture with the electric co-op until we came into a standing block that we have to go into a CSP for a 50 kilowatt. So I think one lesson here is that if we want to accelerate something like this, there's a certain capacity that should not be required to go through a CSP, because developing a project alone is very expensive. So I think this is 50 kilowatt, but you have to go through it and go through the process. Thankfully enough, the SB 175 by your Mr. Chairman is that would really help us a lot in that development. But still, for you to do a CSP for a 50 kilowatt, and the thing here is this is already a joint venture with the electric co-op. How can an electric co-op compete against himself by going through a CSP? It doesn't make sense. So, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. That's a very good point that we can incorporate in the bill. Again, no, the goal here is to hasten the deployment of microgrid systems all over the country, and maybe we can add a capacity limit or maximum capacity for joint ventures or direct negotiation. I don't know kung anong masasabi ng PCC, no? Kasi PCC, ano yan eh. Very strict with CSP yan, no? But maybe you can look at that also, PCC. But the goal, I think, si Mr. Narida made a good point of kung maliit, para mabilis, no? We can have a direct negotiation, total subject naman to ERC regulation, you know, at the end.
Yeah, the benchmark would be set still by ERC. So as long as you don't go beyond that, I think that would be something that would really hasten this or accelerate this development.
Sir, please submit to us your position paper. Include that recommendation. We will
Yes, sir.
seriously look at that also.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. PSAM, any comment, ma'am?
For PSAM, good morning, everyone. I will be submitting our position paper, and there are two points we'd like to raise. I would like to clarify, since we are the administrator of the universal charge, including the universal charge for missionary electrification, we'd like to know if the intention of this bill is for PSAM to directly release the UCME funds to the microgrid system operators. So if that's the intention, the bill, we propose that the bill expressly provide that a rate or a percentage of the existing UCME shall be directly released to this microsystem providers, microgrid system providers. Another point is, since we're the administrator of the universal charge funds, since this will be operating like a distribution utility, this microgrid system operators, they should have an obligation of reporting to us the universal charge they'll be collecting from their end users. So they will be remitting to us their collections from the electricity end users in their areas. So that's 2 points only.
Thank you, ma'am. And Meralco, I know you recently launched your own microgrid system. No? I was fortunately I couldn't join you, but can you share with us your experience regarding that implementation of your microgrid project?
Okay. We have energized yung Cagbalete Island pilot microgrid.
Meron kayong picture or
Ay,
PowerPoint?
sa ngayon sir, wala kaming available eh. And prior to that kasi yung Cagbalete Island was enjoying dati yung mga gensets. But that gensets that was provided 5 or 6 years ago, not effective na. No? So ngayon, when we started yung microgrid pilot sa Cagbalete, siyempre marami natuwang mga tao. Right now, we have energized around 100 customers sa Cagbalete using the microgrid hybrid facility. May solar, genset, and battery. We are targeting around 200 customers right now. And meron kaming second phase to energize the rest of the island. Ang target namin is additional of 600, and some of the commercial establishment right there, yung mga resort owners. So, prior to that, yung mga customers doon, yung mga nagbabayad sila na around 40 to 55 pesos per kilowatt hour in 4 to 7 hours. Kaya nasa ano sila nung underserved. Right now, we are charging our customers yung munang yung kung ano yung rate na binabayaran doon sa mainland right now. Kasi of course we have invested a lot din dito sa pilot project.
So magkano yun, sir?
Yung sa microgrid around 30 ba? 30? Around 30 million.
How much is the rate you're charging?
Nasa mga 10 pesos.
10 pesos.
Right now,
Mura. But that's I would assume there is cross subsidy between the mainland and this one.
Wala naman sir, wala.
True cost na itong 10 pesos?
Actually, hindi siya true cost, pero kung ano yung binabayaran natin doon sa mainland.
Because this is in your franchise area, no? This is in your franchise area, kaya ganyan, ano niya. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, yung comment namin pwede kami.
Sige. Hindi pa pala yun. Akala.
We have 2 comments.
Okay.
In coordination with the DOE, they use to craft their total electrification master plan that lays down all the projects that needed to be implemented to achieve 100% electrification within their respective franchise. Ang second point namin is we respectfully recommend that the DU be given priority in implementing said electrification projects for unserved areas within its franchise. The details will be submitted later po. Thank you.
I think that's the same with PHILRECA, no? But in PHILRECA's, it's right of first refusal. No?
Actually,
But in other words, just give the priority, no? Whatever mechanism. We'll take that into consideration. I think it's in the spirit of competition, opening up to whoever, whether the existing DU or a third party, as long as it's cheap and they will do the job, then the consumers naman, di man nila tinitignan yan. Yeah. Lastly is ERC. Sir, Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The Energy Regulatory Commission fully supports this legislative measure, Senate Bill number 175, as the bill ultimately addresses the acceleration of total electrification and the provision of reliable electricity service in unserved and underserved areas in the country. In addition to the comments and proposals submitted and expressed by other stakeholders, our initial comments, which is subject to the submission of our official position paper, focuses on Section 6 and 9 of the bill on the duties and functions of the Commission. Number 1, the determination of the annual penetration limit. Since the Commission is coming up with the distribution energy resources rule, this annual penetration limit is already being taken into consideration, Mr. Chair. In fact, in our draft, which is also subject to the approval of the Commission, we will be asking from the utilities concerned distribution resource plan, which includes hosting capacity analysis and location benefits analysis, among others. Also, we will be incorporating, since perusal of the bill also mandates the consideration of the distribution development plan and the PSAs. So we will take that into consideration in the draft bill also, Mr. Chair. Second is the release of the annual penetration limit not later than December 5 of each preceding year. We just would like to take into consideration the ERC's bandwidth also as to the compliance to this particular provision of the bill. Third is the provision on the buying and selling from the grid. This, we believe, should be covered by the benchmark pricing under the current CSP rules. This basically requires a different study which takes into consideration the area, the size, the capacity of the technology of the microgrid concerned. Now we also have point number 4, the accreditation mechanism for MSPs. Currently, we have not yet considered accreditation of MSPs. What we have is the accreditation of the qualified third parties, or the QTP. Now, what we do is the issuance of the certified or the COCs for the QTPs. And further discussion internally should be made whether we adopt with the issuance of the COC or we need to promulgate and issue another rules concerning the accreditation of the said MSPs. And lastly, Mr. Chair, is Section 9 on the effect of grid extension. We express also our concern on the further study for the arrangement for the full recovery. We take into consideration also the CAPEX application of the concerned DUs in relation to the acquisition of the distribution system upon the expiration of the MSP contract. So we will be submitting our official position paper, Mr. Chair.
Attorney, one of the features of the bill is the annual penetration limit, no? And this is actually a very crucial feature of the bill because it will dictate how many MSPs can participate in underserved areas, no? Si Techi made a very good point that in unserved, wala naman talaga dun, no? In underserved kasi, there's existing lines, existing poles, there's an existing utility. But in a particular area, it's not being served 24/7, no? So by definition in our law, the UE can declare that as underserved. Ngayon, the penetration limit will manage the technical complexities. No? But is this annual penetration limit, is this possible? Can the ERC generate this penetration limits? Una, may technical capability by ERC? Number 2 is gaano katagal? And number 3 is, are the information and data to generate this penetration limit available for ERC to come up with this annual penetration limit? Because it's a crucial feature. If you cannot come out with that, then wala tayong pinag-uusapan ngayon.
Basically, Mr. Chair, those points you've raised are also being considered by the ERC in the drafting of the DAR rules. Basically, we have to take into consideration the expertise, the technical expertise and the manpower of the commission. In the draft bill also, initially we considered on grid areas. So with the draft bill, marami kaming babaguhin. Like, we have also to consider the off-grid areas, yung distribution development plan, and the consideration of the PSAs. So those points will be taken into consideration, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please study that carefully because this is a crucial feature. For example, if you have any inaccuracy when you come up with the penetration limit, will impact also how DOE will roll out this program. For example, if your penetration limit becomes very conservative, then walang makakapasok na MSPs. No? If it's too liberal, then there'll be grid instability. No? So it's very tricky. I know it's very complex, to come out. That's why I'm asking the ERC if they have the technical knowledge and the information available, because you have to gather information in order to put that together. We want to hear from ERC whether this is a feasible requirement that ERC can fulfill. And then second, I was asking this earlier, Director Mario, and I think si Yusek can help us with this. When you say underserved, it can be as small as a sitio. Diba? It can be as big as a municipality. No? And if you look at what's happening right now in Palawan, ang Puerto Princesa pwedeng maging underserved siya. Correct? Pwedeng i-declare underserved. Therefore, it can be opened up to MSPs. Then you will have now issues of grid stability, at least in the Palawan Island. And then second, you'll have issues of franchise. Because Puerto Princesa is a highly urbanized city. I think they have approximately 500,000 in population, so that's close to probably ilan households, maybe 20,000 households. So can an MSP go into a highly urbanized city even without a franchise? Any of you can, maybe Director Mario, go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may clarify my earlier position on this, as I've mentioned, the underserved areas in off-grid areas are actually on, that is in terms of supply. But in terms of urban cities, with electric cooperatives having the franchise area, the unavailability of 24/7 services, for example, in Palawan, is not because of supply issue. It's the integrity of the entire system. There is the generation portion or the supply portion, the transmission, as well as the distribution. And in fact, when we did our performance audit and assessment, the problems is actually a compoundment of several problems. It's not focused on supply alone. But when we define underserved areas, it's pointing specifically to insufficiency of supply. And most of this happens in off-grid areas where diesel gensets provides the limited supply. And it's because of economics. It's not because of the technology. They can supply 24/7 using the diesel genset, but the price of the generation would be too expensive for the consumers. Thank you.
UCME there in Palawan.
Yes, then the burden will be transferred not on the consumer in the off-grid areas, but rather on the on-grid areas.
No, but my question is, we didn't put any capacity cap for microgrid, no? Ano yung magiging parameters on when do you require a franchise and when do you not require a franchise? Like for example, in W Energy, wala silang franchise, no? They serve 800 households, no? But walang franchise. But can that concept be replicated in a highly urbanized city such as Puerto Princesa?
I believe it's not. It cannot be replicated in highly urbanized areas like Puerto Princesa. As I have mentioned earlier, it's not a supply problem. It's a compounded problem.
Assuming lang we redefine, no, underserved. We redefine underserved. But the basic premise ng underserved will be less than 24/7, no? No, assuming we redefine it, because isa rin ang gusto nating ma-achieve here is doong areas na hindi 24/7. Assuming lang, no, we redefine it. And the basic premise there is hindi siya 24/7, no? Can a QTP enter into, can a MSP enter into that underserved areas? Regardless of the population size, regardless of the land area size?
If I may, sir, I think the better example would be the other part of mainland Palawan, which is the San Vicente, El Nido, which is the other one?
Taytay.
Taytay. Because these three areas are interconnected. But it's more expensive to connect them to the main grid of...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So I would say those three areas, these are big areas, especially with the potentials of El Nido.
For example, El Nido.
Yes, that it can be a microgrid
Pwedeng
area.
MSB pumasok
Yes.
without a franchise?
Yeah, then that would be a more difficult problem. In
Kasi
fact,
El Nido is a fast-growing...
In fact, those are some of the potential comments that we will provide you later, because we might be caught in between issuing or covering a franchise rather than servicing an MSP. For example, how can a DU with a potential limited period of its franchise, let's say for the last remaining 5 years, and then here comes a QTP that would want to recover its investment in 10 or 15 years. So can the franchisee with only 5 years of a franchise issue a waiver for 15 years? So that could be a question. So also in terms of full recovery and subsequent turnover to the DU, similarly situated, what if a different DU is already in place? So will the MSP as a QTP provide an avenue for the participants to have a franchise in the area? So to have expanded that way. So we'll first study it internally at DOE and then harmonize it with our omnibus guidelines for rural electrification, the rationalization of UCME, the amended or revised QTP proposals, and we are also coming up with a total electrification with a possible support from the Office of the President.
Yeah, I'd just like to second that all these are being studied by the DOE, especially so that we're dealing with an established distribution utility, for example, which has an area within its franchise area, an area that is probably underserved. How do we treat the same? We have to make a definite line so that we will not be ending up as favoring one party over the other. So siguro more than the franchise issue is the fairness of those that can be the entities and how we treat the entities that would be better serving that area. Yun yung mas importante. The franchise issue, we had a problem with the franchise issues. Number one, the Department of Energy sees it as a congressional, it's within the legislative to determine which entity should be given a franchise. And-
Assume that under EPIRA, because QTP for unviable areas is a tacit delegation of that franchising power only for unviable, maliliit, no? But we're talking about unserved areas which has 20,000,
Existing,
10,000, 20,000. Ito is a sizable area already, no? So we might run. I'm just asking the department what is the legal consequences of this type of proposal.
Masyado siyang magulo kung papasukin siya ng executive branch. Kasi, yung issue pa lang ng PECO at saka MORE, medyo binabantayan namin yun. Kasi, pwede naman kasing iba yun kasi total takeover ng isang entity yun. Yung isa naman ay pwedeng paunti-unting pumapasok na yun naman nakabantay naman yung mga distribution utilities sa area nila. Ang tinitingnan ng Department of Energy, hindi yon yung away na yan. Ang tinitingnan namin is dun sa kabilang side, binigyan ka ng prangkisa, pero dapat meron kang obligasyon na pagsilbihan yung mga nasa loob ng prangkisang yan. At ang pagpasok ng ibang partido dyan sa franchise area mo, ang pagpasok ng ibang entities, a consequence ng hindi mo pagtupad dun sa obligasyon na binigay sa iyo ng pamahalaan. Kung madedelegate lang siya dito sa Department of Energy, kailangan lang masiguro na patas yung labanan ng entities. Ang tinitingnan din namin, ang hinihingi din ng House of Representatives sa amin, ay yung mga rules and regulations na pwede nilang i-adopt para magkaroon din ng sort of fair treatment sa mga nag-a-apply ng prangkisa sa kanila.
Mona Lisa?
Yes, Mr. Chair. No, just to clarify perhaps the concept of QTP. The QTP is sort of a contractual, well, not sort of, it is a contractual relationship between NPC and the QTP provider. So it doesn't need the franchise right now because it piggybacks on NPC's obligation. So hindi po siya, pati yung, so two aspects, the QTP and then the NPP, which is just the suppliers, a new power provider. So dalawa yung programa ni NPC, SPAG ng PRIVA. Yung QTP, which includes the wires, and then the supply. So pareho siya na nagpipiggyback lang dun sa obligasyon po ni NPC. Kasi off-grid siya. I think, sir, yung complication that comes with microgrid coming into underserved in the main grid is that it's in EPIRA, it wasn't contemplated.
Palawan is off-grid.
Yes, opo. So pwede, actually, technically, kaya kanina ang sagot, pwede yung Palawan. But I guess that's why it's incumbent on the definition of microgrid, underserved, unserved, to set out the parameters. Will it be defined on a geographic area? Will it be defined on the basis of capacity? Will it be defined on the basis of household? Or an amalgamation of all those things? Like how highly urbanized cities are defined under the local government code. Meron pong mga parameters.
In theory, the MSP under this law can or the
come
QTP
into-
right now, no, sorry, the QTP right now can piggyback
Not in the main grid, sir.
the,
Only
for
off-grid.
in Palawan, can
Opo,
piggyback
yes,
under the NPC charter.
Charter, opo. And obligations under
So as big as
EPIRA.
Puerto Princesa, pwedeng
Theoretically, but
Theoretically.
the QTP program po kasi requires a waiver. So dun nagkakatalo dun sa waiver.
But if we will empower DOE under the law
To
to determine, and then that's a big city that they can say, oh, pwede na itong available na ito. But the question is, kailangan ba ng franchise?
If they're under QTP, hindi po. Kasi nga po, they just ride on the NPC waiver. And they're just service providers of NPC.
May issue rin kasi dito sa within the grid na, okay, it's inside Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, but it's not connected to the main grid. And it forms part of the franchise area, for example, of an EC or even Meralco, for example. Meron siya sa loob. So yun yung mga issues na how do we treat the same? Will NAPOCOR and the QTP entities come in or not? Yun yung mga medyo kailangang magawa ng rules.
I think what this bill is trying to do, maybe let's just go back a bit now, because we're getting into the web of the regulations, which actually brought us to the situation where we're in right now. It is the regulation that we have right now that prevents all of those unserved and underserved area to remain unelectrified. That is really where we're at right now. That's why this bill for us in the private sector is really, I should say, disruptive. But because it really, if this is passed, the 2022 target may be achieved if we really do it right. Because it is not only disruptive in terms of removing the hurdles of the bureaucracy, but also in allowing entry of the new technology so that it can serve underserved and unserved. So maybe let's just venture, for example, the microgrid definition. In other jurisdictions, there are microgrids in cities, like in Melbourne, they have a microgrid. In as urbanized as Melbourne, in as urbanized as Sydney, they have microgrids. And in as remote as Palawan, some islands, there is a microgrid. So I think for purposes of maybe clarifying, maybe we can have this bill say that distribution energy resource is for urban, and microgrid is for rural or missionary area. Maybe we can do that distinction because microgrid can exist in both, and they are in several jurisdictions existing in both. So, if we look at the NPC statistics, the biggest 60% of the served areas are about 1 megawatt and below. The 40% are 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt. So if we use capacity as a benchmark for this particular bill, that it can be 1 megawatt and below. Because, for example, in the case of Rio Tuba and in the case of Malapascua, they started at 200. In the case of Sabang, they're starting now as 1.2 or 1.3, but that's a mix, no? So in reality, we can look at the present, because the current SPAG areas, in their statistics, the biggest one, except for Sabang, is at 60% of that is 1 megawatt. So if we just look at the statistics, we can say if this particular area has a 1 megawatt, I'm talking about underserved. Kasi pag unserved, wala ka naman statistics Talagang wala siyang kuryente dun If we're looking at, or underserved are those communities with or connected loads with 1 megawatt and below. Then they are MSP provider eligible. We can for in the rural areas, no. So because there are statistics in so far at what NPC has, no. Yun sir meron kasi talagang microgrid even in urban. So yung tanong niyo sir na pwede ba sa Puerto Princesa? Yes, it depends on how you will apply the technology. It is possible. Ganon. So
in technology, it's possible. No? I'm just asking yung franchise requirement. No?
Sir, you're suggesting that the waiver is okay. The waiver is okay. To us, the waiver is okay, provided that the waiver is granted in a reasonable time period. That's why, because at the end of the day, you will transfer the asset naman to the electric cooperative or the utilities. So it's for as long as the waiver is granted and not unreasonably denied, di ba, sir? Ganun yan That's why for us and those of us who are working as a micro grid provider, waivers are okay. What we do not like is that it takes them forever to issue the waiver.
I think the waiver, sir, is the entry point. But the after the entry, That's where you, whether or not we require a franchise or not. That's where it comes up.
If they have a waiver, sir, the
Mr. Atem, Mr. Atem, are you raising your hands?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think the way we look at microgrids is the future of democratized energization. We are in a transition, so we are having this discussion about served, underserved, and I think your bill is fantastic to set the stage clear. And your bill is very much on, look guys, you want to waive, no waive, negotiate, you have 33 months, 90 days to complete that process. Don't do it at length. Whether it's a city area, the way we work, we never go to an electric cooperative alone. We believe that it's a tripartite or multi-party stakeholders approach. We spend a lot of time approaching the mayor, the barangay captain, the barangay council, the NGOs to form a resolution that allows, let's say, sets the political stage of people who says, we want to be electrified. The next stage is to convince the electric cooperative to waive that area for the benefit of those people, not the benefit of private sector, for the benefit of those people. It works. With your bill, 175, you are putting a time limit and a pressure, and it's not an open-ended debate where private sector and those people out there will wait. Now, in countries like Netherlands, Germany, what you see is happening is a nightmare for the existing grid operators. Nightmare. What is happening? Neighborhoods say, look, and it's another reason than underserved and unserved. In the Netherlands, there are neighborhoods who says, we don't want your dirty energy anymore. We, citizens of this street and this street and this street, we unite, we set up a company, we want a microgrid to bring our own wind energy straight into my house. Now, the law here in those countries are supporting those citizens who want to democratize their future consumption. Now, why not in cities? What if there are units in cities that are underserved? In Singapore, for example, one of the biggest research that is about to be concluded is to put a microgrid at a building level or an industrial. We are negotiating right now in Singapore where industrial estates could be a full operated in microgrid where we are willing to invest and set the technology. So technology is there. The capital is there to go into microgrids, into industrial estates or apartment complexes or underserved or unserved units in cities. I think the Bill 175 can be refined, but I think the most important thing is to enable the dialogue to be concluded positively between the franchise holder and the QTP that comes there.
Well, thank you, Mr. Atep. And I would like to urge the department, DOE, and also ERC to look at this franchise issue, no? Because I think that will be a crucial element in moving forward with this bill. I think if it's a smaller area like Sabang, wherein you can piggyback, then you don't raise a lot of eyebrows. But if you piggyback Puerto Princesa, which has 10,000 residents, then you raise a lot of issues. We are delegating the power to declare areas unserved and underserved, and in fact, waiving the waiver, because what if after 60 days you cannot negotiate? No, DOE should have that power to say, look, we don't need the waiver anymore because the consumers are suffering, and then we allow other people to come in. Then that raises again another issue of franchise, no? Because then we will not be looking at only the unserved areas. Tachi is right. The unserved is not the issue. The underserved, that's a lot of communities, cities, towns, and sitios, no? And we need to look at the legal complexity in that. I thank Attorney Mona Lisa for clarifying, but moving forward, we need to make sure that this will not be an issue on a roadblock in the future. No? So with that, I'd like to, any last words from the body? Yes, Viking.
Just some elucidation on the taxonomy of unserved areas, Mr. Chairman. Meron kasi yung unserved areas talaga na under NPC SPAG and some island cooperatives. Now, they're underserved because of the generation capacity inadequacy. And one of the answers to that is yung NPP nga. And then in the very small island grids na may NPC SPAG gensets, the underservedness is caused by either of two things. Lack of demand, nighttime demand. Number two is yung budgeted fuel within the NPC itself. So that should be easy to resolve because just give them the budget.
Technically, we can narrow the definition of underserved, but it will boil down to less than 24/7 service, and legitimate parameters. Doon magbo-boil down yan, and that's where the complexity comes in. No? And we would like to urge the department to look at this and advise the committee on how to move forward regarding this franchise issue.
Mr. Chair, before we end, we just like to clarify that the move to take away the subsidy is on the part of the UCME, wherein we take the subsidy from the consumers. So yun yung gustong tanggalin ng department. At para kung magka-come up ng another subsidy, we just wanted to make it clear na hindi siya dapat nanggagaling sa consumers.
I do agree that we need to rationalize that. No? Case in point, Puerto Princesa, pati SM doon may subsidy. No? Pati yung mga hotel doon may subsidy because SPAG area yan. No? So we're paying for SM to enjoy cheaper electricity rates. But there's also a developing point, no? Dahil SM will not go there if they have 30 peso per kilowatt hour electricity naman. So there must be some developmental stage wherein they're allowed to enjoy cheap rates but not naman perpetual. No? Hindi naman buong, diba?
Some of the power providers naman do not want to improve.
Yeah, correct.
So yung system nila dati pa din.
Yeah.
Kaya hindi talaga.
Yeah, we'll go into that later on when we discuss the total electrification plan of our country. Well, just to end, I would like to again remind Director Marasigan the request of Senator Marcos on the total electrification master plan, National Unified Strategy for Total Electrification, Missionary Electrification Development Plan, and Distribution Development Plan. Please submit it to us on Thursday. Kahit na electronic copy, okay lang. No? And then the position papers, please submit to us on or before September 1. No? We would like to hear from you your comments. I think PHILRECA, si Attorney Janine made a lot of good comments, and si Mr. Narida made a lot of good comments. Please submit to us. We prefer kung meron na kayong suggested language on the provisions, mas better para alam namin kung ano yung intention ho ninyo. With that in mind, thank you very much for your time. The meeting is adjourned.